Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Thursday, July 1st, and we're going to talk about a lot of different things today. So instead of talking about Florida State, I figured today would be a great day to really dive into a lot of different topics. And obviously, we're going to talk a little bit of recruiting. I want to give sort of some thoughts that I have on the name, image, likeness situation. I want to make sure that my position on this is clarified because I feel like based on some responses I've gotten from people the last couple days that I have not done a very good job expressing what I think on that. And I also want to have some news about what we're doing here at Irish Breakdown that I want to get into. And then, of course, the majority of this is going to be about questions and answers because that is honestly the most fun part of the show. So as I dive into some of these things, if you obviously love any super chats, but you don't have to rush into that because some of this stuff is going to go through quickly, and then we'll get to the Q&A. So hope everybody's having a good day today. So I'm going to fly through some things real quick, and I want to kick things off by talking about name, image, likeness, and just my overall opinion of this subject, and then also what I think this is going to mean for Notre Dame. So first of all, I want to make sure that people understand I am a proponent of name, image, and likeness, players being able to get compensated for name, image, and likeness. There are certain rules and restrictions that I would put on it in sort of a way to somewhat protect the players and just the integrity of what college athletics is supposed to be about, not from an amateurism standpoint, but just making sure that these young people are being protected with their time, making sure that there's protections to put in place to make sure people aren't taking advantage of them and things along those lines, and also to make sure that their time is being balanced correctly. I don't want a bunch of businesses getting in these kids' DMs trying to get in touch with them. I would like to see. I'm a big proponent of the student athletes that have signed with companies. They're going to help them promote them in that way. I think that's a great way to go, as long as it's a company you trust and a company that's going to look out for your best interest. Things along those lines. As I said here before, I've talked about this in the past. You walk in a Notre Dame bookstore and you see jerseys, and no, the jerseys don't have player names on them, but just so happened that the last 3 years there was always a number 12 jersey in there somewhere. There was always there'd be a number 83 jersey in 2019. There's always jerseys of the players that are currently top players on the team, and then you look at the prices of those jerseys. Those prices are pretty expensive, and you're wondering, like, how much of this are the players getting in for this? Beyond what things that they should already be getting a part of because of the fact that they do bring in so much revenue. I'm also very anti-paying players from the standpoint of the NCAA paying players as if they're employees. You get X amount of dollars because you play at Alabama or you play at Notre Dame. That's, to me, a different situation for me. So, when I look at this situation, I'm a proponent of this avenue. My frustration, my anger, my annoyance, all the different emotions that I have had in recent days and recent weeks. Grim, always here, no question yet. Thanks, Grim. I appreciate the super chat very, very much. But for me, my frustration is more about just the lack of leadership that the NCAA has showed on this. And I don't know why I continue to be surprised by their just the stupidity of the NCAA. The fact that they literally had the audacity to put out a release yesterday to call what they're doing a policy, when there is their policy is basically, we're not doing anything about it. You do whatever you need to do. So they said, if you have a state law, that you go by that state law, and they're not going to do anything. If there isn't a state law, then you can profit from it, and they're not going to do anything. So they're basically not going to do anything. There's no guidance on, trying to make sure that there's college programs from almost every state in the country. And there's nothing to try to create some semblance of uniformity. There's no conversation about what can we do to protect student athletes, to protect their rights. I mean, how many of these kids aren't aware that, hey, you need to get your brand out there. You need to get that thing trademarked. You need to have legal protections and all these other kind of things so that people aren't taking advantage of you. There's so many things the NCAA could do in this. If the NCAA was smart, they would come up with a plan to say, hey, look, because of this, we're going to now make a big change where we're going to allow college institutions to create majors or tracks, or even if it's not a major, but maybe a minor or a concentration, which would be great, especially for basketball players, is, hey, look, you're going to take classes on branding. You're going to take classes on licensing. You're going to take a class on, various economic topics that would be beneficial to them. We're going to take marketing classes, business ethics classes, communication classes, all these type of things to say, hey, it's our job to make sure that we're helping you not just to profit off of yourself, but make sure that we're giving you the educational resources that you can thrive, that you can become a true entrepreneur, which is what they do for every other student, right? If you want to be a business major, they're going to give you all the resources that you need to go be successful in that part of your business. Well, athletes, it's like all they care about with athletes is, well, as long as you know you can run fast and throw far and tackle and dunk and hit a baseball really far or score a lot of soccer goals or whatever the case may be, we don't really care about, making sure that we've really given you the pathway to be as successful as possible and using your talent to benefit yourself. We're just going to use your talent to benefit ourselves. And so those are things that the NCAA could and should do, but instead they're basically just kind of washing their hands of it and saying, we're not going to deal with it, which is just total cowardice and a complete lack of leadership. But I want to make sure that people understand the name, image, and likeness thing, I support. I was joking with my wife yesterday. She builds logos and she does branding for websites and things like that. And I said, hey, you know what? You should go in and try to help these college athletes with this, because I know she would look out for them and things like that. It was a joke. But the point being is I'm all for that. I'm all for these young people being able to profit in some ways off of their hard work, their blood, sweat, and tears, and the things that they do in that regards. And so there just needs to be a more coherent plan in place. And right now there is no coherence. And they actually had the audacity to use the words clarity and, I'm going to pull this up because it was comical, the things that they put in there. It's like, they'll just say anything. I mean, these people have no shame. They use the words in their policy. First of all, they called it a policy, which was hilarious because there was literally no policy in there. It's just, we're not going to do anything about it. They use the words fairness and integrity and clarity to talk about their release yesterday, which is just absolutely insane. So that is my stance on the name, image, and likeness discussion. I am pro NIL. I am anti NCAA in the manner in which they handle it. And I'm going to be honest with you. I have been frustrated with the NCAA for years, but I always felt like the NCAA was a necessary evil. I'm at the point now where it's like all you are is just an entity that just cares about making money. There is no concern or care for college athletics or college athletes involved there. I'm ready for the NCAA to be done, and I'm ready for it to die a very painful, fast death, and for something to be in replace of it that would hopefully be a situation where it would be better. It would be better for student athletes, but also for institutions, because at the end of the day, yes, the student athletes are marketable and they are a part of a process. But the reality is when Notre Dame players leave Notre Dame fans stay fans of Notre Dame. It doesn't matter who the players are. It's your love is for Notre Dame. And you happen to love and respect those players when they're there. But you should see some of the numbers we get for when we put NFL stories out of nothing but Notre Dame players. It's like, he's not at Notre Dame anymore and he doesn't play for my favorite NFL team. So, who cares? That's what a lot of people feel. And I don't say I like that, but I mean, the love is for Notre Dame. The love is for Duke basketball. The love is for Kentucky basketball. The love is for those type of entities, not necessarily the individual players per se. And so you also need to make sure that we're protecting that brand as well as also protecting and lifting up the individual brands of the players in the sports where that is profitable. So that is my stance on that. So next, let's talk a little bit of recruiting. So I've been able to do some digging these last couple days. Just want to give some latest things on what I've heard in regards to recruiting here with Notre Dame. Number one, Jalen Sneed. Everything is looking good there. It's just going to be a timing thing. I think there's some there's no decision making necessarily going on. It's just kind of doing some things in the background, just to taking his time, enjoying the process. But I feel great about where things stand there. That's not going to change, in my opinion. Some other players that of note, Jaden Bellamy is going to make an announcement tomorrow on July 2nd. If you're listening to this via podcast, it may be Friday already, July 2nd. So his announcement is going to come today. Multiple sources I've spoken with, everybody feels it's trending in Notre Dame's direction. So that would be a good addition to the class. Devin Moore from Naples, Florida, another defensive back. It is, again, Notre Dame is really trying to push hard to get him to decide this summer. It is very similar to what we've talked about with defensive backs, which is He likes Notre Dame a lot. It's just about, are you comfortable enough with Notre Dame to say, yes, this is my choice, or do you still have some desires to see some other places and see some other options out there? If he decides this summer, I feel good about where Notre Dame is. If he wants to carry this in the fall, I become a lot more nervous about that and about defensive back recruiting as a whole. Staying along the secondary aspect of it, Jake Pope is supposed to be making a decision soon. As far as I know, there is no specific timeline for that, but it has been trending in Notre Dame's favor here for a few weeks now since he visited. And what I've learned from a couple sources is that the Ohio State and Alabama visits, while impressive, did not move the needle for him in regards to his feelings about Notre Dame. Now that could change. North Carolina is still making a hard push, and those other programs are still making a hard push as well. But it right now things are looking good in Notre Dame's favor. Benjamin Morrison is a little bit of the opposite feel. So Notre Dame was in really good shape coming out of the visit, and Washington has been able to rally back, and now it's trending in Washington's direction. So Notre Dame is still battling. They still want him. They would still take him. He absolutely would have a spot in this class. I have some people ask me, and I don't know if this is being floated out there, or if this is just people asking me their opinion, but I've had multiple people in the last several days ask me, hey, is there a take? Is there going to be room for him? If Benjamin Morrison wants to come to Notre Dame, there's going to be room for Benjamin Morrison to come to Notre Dame. There's no question about it. It's just that things are not trending in a good direction for Notre Dame, but they are still battling. But the Devin Moore one is really the big one. If you can get Moore and Bellamy and Mickey, that's a really good corner class. Is it as good as it would have been with Moore and Morrison and Mickey? No, it would not have been. But it's still a good class. The final one is very interesting, and that is Xavier Nawakpa. So I have talked to many sources on this in in every direction, and nobody seems to have any idea what he's going to do at this point in time or the time frame with which he's going to do it. But there have been some very interesting developments in recent days. Ohio State picked up a fifth defensive back yesterday with Terrence Brooks from, I believe he's from Texas. And the interesting thing here is from what I have been told for the last month or so, is that Ohio State was looking to take 6 DBs in this class. The commitment of Terrence Brooks gives them 5 DBs. The other thing I have been told, really, and this has been in the last about 3 weeks, is that Xavion Bradshaw from Bishop Gorman in Nevada is Ohio State's top safety on the board. That's a guy they really want, and they're looking good for him. And then, of course, you have Xavier Nawakpa. Well, from what I'm told, Ohio State's not going to take both and get to 7 DBs. They're going to take 6 DBs, and Terrence Brooks gives them 5. They also have another safety in the class in Kai Stokes. So this is a situation where this is why I said the longer this plays out, the better it is for Notre Dame, because this could be a situation where Ohio State could end up just saying, hey, we can't take a chance of losing this guy to get this guy. We're just going to make the move and take this guy. That would be great for Notre Dame. And I would be surprised if Notre Dame doesn't use the fact, and not in a negative recruiting, but just simply pointing out the fact that, hey, look, you're our number one guy. I don't know what anybody else is telling you, but you're our number one guy, and we'll take you whenever. There's no running out of room for you in our class. And so I think that is something that I'm probably about as optimistic as I've been about Xavier Nawakpa. Now, again, that is just more of a circumstances situation. That is not me getting intel saying, yes, he's leaning towards Notre Dame. It's not that at all. It's just more of my experience with this is if this continues to play out for a while, it's going to bode well for Notre Dame. And that's kind of a wrap for the defensive recruiting in 2022. 2023, obviously Notre Dame off to a great start, and I would expect some more dominoes to fall here over the next month or two in the 2023 class. But what I have been able to gather is Notre Dame is not pushing for any 2023 kids to commit. They didn't push for Keon Keeley commit. They didn't push for Brennan Vernon to commit. Those kids made decisions, and Notre Dame was obviously going to take those players. But they're not pushing for those kids to commit, which I think is a sign to me that, and from some things I've gathered, that as good as this 2022 class can be, Notre Dame understands they're riding a hot hand right now, and that you need to make sure that you're not getting too far ahead of yourself with 2023 kids, because there's no need to. You took a big class in 2021. You're going to take another big class in 2022. With 2023, your numbers in it may not be as high. So the focus needs to be on impact players across the board. And so that's what I'm hearing, is that Notre Dame is shooting for the top of the board at a lot of positions. And when that's the case, you're not going to necessarily fill up early, which is a good thing, in my opinion, in this instance. So let's talk a little bit about Notre Dame receiver recruiting. Right now, I feel Notre Dame is in a really good place with CJ Williams. I feel like they're in a position where they could maybe wrap this one up by the end of the summer. It's just about continuing to make sure that the momentum you have now continues and you don't lose that, which is helped by the fact that they're getting ready. They just started a dead period, I believe, today. I think the dead period starts. So it's not like these kids are going to be getting on other campuses and things like that. Tobias Merriweather is a very interesting situation. So it's still a deal where if he commits this summer, I feel really good about where things stand with Notre Dame. If he decides he wants to wait and take more visits and let things play out into the fall, then I'm going to be a little bit more concerned. But right now, Notre Dame feels very good about where they are with him. Same thing with Nicholas Anderson. They feel really good with where they are with him, but it is going to come down to him in Oregon. I would imagine a decision will be made with at least two of those guys by the end of July is kind of how I see it. Now, whether or not we know about all those decisions may be a different story. But I do expect decisions to be made with those three. Did a little bit of digging on Xavion Bradshaw. It sounds like there's a little bit of a difference of opinion with some people on him. And at the end of the day, that one's not – I don't think that one's going to happen. But there are some people that like him more than others. But yeah, so I'll leave it at that. But it doesn't – I don't think that one's going to happen right now. I think they're going to focus on getting the bigger receivers – the more polished receivers that do a little bit of different things than what he does in the class. So that's where they are with that. So I don't expect that recruitment in Notre Dame and Xavion Bradshaw to really do a whole lot moving forward. And that's I'll have more on this here down the road, but as far as a podcast format and YouTube format, that's about all I'm comfortable saying on that one. Nicholas Singleton did some digging on this. I believe it was Tom Loy. I got a text message saying that Tom Loy, Matt, I think you're the one that sent me a text, right? I believe it was Tom Loy. Let me find Matt's text just because I want to make sure I'm giving proper credit to I believe it was Tom Loy that reported that Nicholas Singleton is going to make a decision on July 6th. So that will be Tuesday. From what I gathered today, Notre Dame is not feeling optimistic about this one at all. It sounds like, from what I'm told from a couple different sources, that Nicholas really likes Notre Dame. There are a couple people around him that also like Notre Dame, but there's some very strong, influential forces around him that really, really want Penn State. And so right now it looks like Penn State is going to win the deal, and Notre Dame is going to strike out with their number 2 back. I don't believe that Notre Dame is going to get a second back in this class. There's not going to be any plan B guys being taken in this class. If another back emerges that they view to be as good as the guys that they lost on, then that would be a guy. And I've mentioned Jabron Payne, who right now it would be more of a plan B guy. There's some academic things I have to find out about, but I'm not saying he's an academic question. I'm saying I don't know the academic fit. He had an injury last year, so I mean he'd be a plan B guy. But if he comes out as a senior and he's bigger and he blows up, maybe they could make a move there. But they're not going to just go to a second running back. And this is what we had said, what we had predicted here, and that's what I've been able to gather from sources, that if they miss Singleton, they'll probably still keep trying to recruit him. But I don't think that they'll have much of a shot at flipping him. But they'll still try. But they're not going to take a plan B guy, which is a good thing. I'm glad to hear that. Offensive line, basically, when it comes to the big name guys, it's Schrouth and Zach Rice. That's really all that's left on the board right now for Notre Dame when it comes to offensive line play of the. I guess you could call. Emil Wagner a big time guy. I have a difference of opinion, but he is ranked pretty high. But that's really it. They've got to get at least one of those guys, preferably Schrouth and Singleton. Schrouth is still out there, and that's good news. The fact is that's another one that it's kind of taken a different turn. I thought that if it went a longer, it was going to benefit Wisconsin, which it did. But now that Wisconsin seemed to be the where he was going to go, now the longer it goes on past that, I think it's good for Notre Dame. He's still listening. He's still receptive. I still think it's a situation where in his heart of hearts, he likes Notre Dame. But as we've said before, there's going to be pressure to stay closer to home, not from parents, but from, community and things like that. And and then just making that decision to leave home. So they're still pushing there. Zach Rice, as I've said recently, nothing new there. Notre Dame made themselves a player for him. Now it's about what's next. Can you close the deal for him? And then Emil Wagner, again, I don't see him making a decision here in the very, very near future, but Notre Dame is going to continue to push there. So that is where things stand with Notre Dame recruiting. I want to address running back recruiting because we've had a lot of people talk about this. And this is one of those things that's kind of feel like it's the Brian Kelly conversation where we need to be able to give Lance Taylor some credit for the fact that Notre Dame has recruited better in recent seasons at running back than it did previously. We also have to be willing to admit the fact that of the 4 running backs that Lance Taylor's got commitments from, 2 of them were primarily happened not because of him, but because of other people. I've shared the Chris Tyree situation before, that he was basically close to committing to Notre Dame and had basically told Notre Dame he was going to come, but he wanted to take some visits. But he went to Oklahoma, and Oklahoma blew him away. And he had basically told Coach Taylor and Notre Dame that he was leaning towards Oklahoma. Then Chip Long got involved, and it was Chip Long that got him back in with Notre Dame and got him back in the class. We talked about last year. Obviously, Lance Taylor did a nice job with Audric Estime late in the game. It was Terry Joseph who drove and Tommy Reese who drove the recruitment for Logan Diggs, not Lance Taylor. And they did a really nice job getting Jadarian Price. You guys know I like Jadarian Price. But the fact is Notre Dame targeted 3 top running backs that they viewed as being top-of-the-board players, and they lost on all of them. And the manner in which they lost, to me, is more of the disturbing thing, is that they didn't even get Gavin Sawchuk on the board. I had been told that, that they felt good about Singleton, and so they kind of moved on from Sawchuk, and then I was told that that's not what happened, that they just flat got beat for him. And then obviously the manner in which I think there were other coaches that did a really good job with Dallin Hayden, some offense, some defense, and that the visit was very impactful, but the manner in which Lance Taylor recruited Dallin Hayden ultimately was one of the deciding factors of why he went to Ohio State. And that's problematic. And you can say, yes, he's getting good backs, and he is. They're getting good backs. Logan Diggs, Audric Estime, Jadarian Price are good backs. But the fact is that now this is 2 years in a row where they flat out missed on their top targets across the board and have had to kind of go to sort of what's those next level guys. I don't consider Jadarian Price a next level guy per se, but he wasn't ever part of that big 3. He was always sort of that next guy. And now we need to be able to say, hey, look, running back recruiting is going okay. I mean, they've got Jadarian Price, they got Diggs, they got Estime. That's good. But we also have to be able to admit the fact that you've got a running backs coach who's not getting the top guys on the board, and the only time he did was with a big assist from the offensive coordinator, which is fine. I mean, that's how it's supposed to be, but at some point in time, you need a running backs coach that can start winning some of these battles. You don't have to win them every year, but you've got to win them more than once in a 3-year span. So that's a little bit problematic. And then you combine it with some of the issues that we're seeing at wide receiver with development and recruiting. Look, that side of the ball, look, we have to say, look, defense is killing it right now. Offense is doing good, but is it doing as good as it needs to do? No, it's not. And that has to be addressed by Brian Kelly. And when you look at what the defense is doing just from a work, a closing, all those type of things, it's certainly becoming problematic. Matthew Hader says, Coach D, this may be my first comment, but been listening to you for years. I appreciate that. Who's your top of the board 2023 not committed or QB? So my top of the board 2023 QB, Matthew, is Dante Moore. And that to me is he's different than Tyler Buchner in some ways, but there's a lot of similarities between those two players. I think Tyler is a more dynamic athlete. I think Tyler's a more dynamic runner. Dante is a passer who can run, but he's a passer where Tyler Buchner's more of a dual threat quarterback. But that is the kind of recruiting you need to have at quarterback to take the next level. You've got to get your Tyler Buchner, and I think Tyler Buchner has a chance to be a brilliant player. But then you also have to do what Clemson has done, where you get Trevor Lawrence in 18, but then 2 years later you follow him up with DJ Uiagalelei. I think I got that right. I think I might have got that right that time. But then he sits for he redshirts for a year, not redshirts, but gets some playing time in Trevor's junior year, and he knows that I'm the backup for a year, and then Trevor leaves, and then I'm taking over for a couple of years, and you kind of keep it that way. Hopefully that can be the Tyler Buchner, Dante Moore transition. But he is definitely my top of the board quarterback. I don't know if I have a another top of the board guy at every position, but there are some where I have that guy. I mean, to me on receiver, my top of the board guys of what I've seen so far are Cardinal Tate and Jaylen Brown. No question about it. At tight end, you've got to get one of Jackson Howard and Deuce Robinson. Have to get them. At linebacker, to me, there's a couple guys I really like that stand out to me that I would like to see you get. And there's one guy I'm not going to mention at linebacker because I'm going to talk about him next. But, I really like Drake Bowen. He's an in-state kid. I think you have to get him. I did not mention Sonny Styles because I still kind of view him as a hybrid guy. I think he's going to be a linebacker, but maybe he wants to play safety. And I don't care. I'd give him a chance to play wherever the heck he wants. Sonny Styles is a top-of-the-board guy. And then there's another kid, and if I had to pick one player besides the quarterback that if you could say you can only guarantee that Notre Dame's going to get one other guy in this class, who would that be? It'd be A.J. Harris from Alabama, the 5-star cornerback from Alabama. He is a special, special player. He is my number one. He's the best corner I've seen so far in high school, regardless of class. So 2022 and 2023. The kid had something like 10 touchdowns last year on defense and special teams. He's just absurd. And incredibly high academics, comes from a great family, military family, respectful. I mean, just an awesome family who actually grew up, watching Notre Dame games. It's a Notre Dame family. So that doesn't mean anyone's pushing Notre Dame. They're not. Notre Dame's going to have to win this one, but it just means that in this era of, Notre Dame can't get top of this, that, and the other, this is the perfect kind of kid. There are no excuses to not get a kid like this, meaning no built-in excuses. Well, he has low grades. He's from Alabama. He's not from Alabama. He is in Alabama now, but he's not a born and raised Alabama kid. So that would be one that would be huge for me. And he likes Notre Dame a lot. And I talked to a source the other day that knows AJ a little bit, and what he wants to do academically and beyond football is going to play a much bigger role in his decision than your typical 5-star cornerback. So that would probably be one, Matthew, that would be, my top of the board guys left on either side of the ball. AJ would probably be my guy on defense, but it's tough picking between him and Sonny Styles. I think they're both very important. But just because of AJ in the unique position, I'd probably go with him, but you know what? Screw it. It's my show. I can do what I want. I'm going to go 1A, 1B on defense. It's going to be A.J. Harris and Sonny Styles. Those are the two guys you got to get. And then on offense, it's Dante Moore right now. And then I think if you get Dante Moore, then Cardinal Tate and those other type of guys follow. He's that kind of player. I'm not saying they're going to get Dante Moore. It's going to be a battle. I'm not saying they're even the leader for Dante Moore. I'm just saying they're in the game. He made the visit this summer. They're in the game. And this is going to be – you could argue this is going to be the biggest recruitment of Tommy Rees's tenure as offensive coordinator. If you can pull off that kind of move as an offensive coordinator, that gives you a lot of cachet to work with when it comes to recruiting the next level. So, 2023, that would be the answer to that question, Matthew. Now, before we dive into questions, and we're going to get to here in a second. So got some news. The last couple of days, I have had a lot of different meetings about just the future of Irish Breakdown, the website, and just the future of our whole package, because I'm trying to create a entity that goes beyond a website. I'm trying to create an entity that goes beyond just message board, boards and YouTubes and podcasts and merchandise. And it's not just individual, it's all of it together. But I really believe that having an online community like a message board is very important. I went from a couple weeks ago to having no options to now I have 2 great options. And I'm going to have one more meeting tonight. And then I'm going to sit down with some people and try to hammer some things out this weekend. And my goal, my hope is that within the next 2 weeks, the message board will not only be, we'll have decided what we're going to do, but we'll have launched it and we'll be ready to go. When that happens, I will have multiple premium options for people to become subscribers and members of that community. It will be a premium service. As I have said before, it will not impact the YouTube channel. We are still going to talk about things. We are still going to give info. We are still going to give intel. We are not going to start holding things back from the YouTube community. That's not what we're going to do. That's not what I'm about. That doesn't mean that, look, if I get news and scoop, I'm going to put it on the message board. You may get it several hours before you get it from the YouTube channel. So I'm hoping that people will become members of both. and that we can make that community. Because like the entity is, I want people to kind of be a part of everything. And then you may have a preference of what you prefer, but people are part of everything. So that's what I'm looking to do. So I still have some final, I's that I got to dot and T's I got to cross, but I'm very excited about that I believe that within the next 2 weeks, we will have a message board launch. So I was trying to get it by the end of this next weekend or this weekend, but it doesn't look like that's going to quite happen yet. But we're very close, and I'm very excited about it. I know it may not look like it because I'm trying to be reserved, but I'm getting very excited about that step. So I think we're going to have some more on that. So we've also had we've hired a few interns for recruiting. I'm going to give them a shot to see what they can do. So far, I'm pleased with the type of personality they have, the character they have, and just sort of that next step. So you guys already know Blake Sofa. He has done some things already for us. Blake is growing. I hired a fellow named Joe De Leon. Some of you may recognize Joe's name. He used to be one of the co-hosts of the Locked In Irish podcast. Of course, Ryan Roberts was also part of that. We had Ryan Roberts on yesterday. He's doing some writing for us from an NFL draft standpoint. We still have JP Scott doing work for us. So we're hoping that the recruiting operation is going to get rolling here very soon. But the big news, of course, is the message board. And then I'm very excited about that. And because it will be a premium message board, it will be something that I'll put a lot of scoop on, insight, intel, things like that on as well. So very much looking forward to that. So that is going to do it for my part of what this show is about today in regards to the things I wanted to talk about. So next, what I want to do is I want to start talking about the things that you all want to talk about. So let's get rolling. So obviously Tommy Guns, IB Nation, let's get ready to rock and roll. Let's see here. Tony Stengel starts things off. Like many others in this chat, when Notre Dame loses, I take it personally. It literally ruins my weekend. Are you guys allowed to feel like that being an analyst, or do you have to reel it in a little? Tony, that's a good question. Let me think for a second as I take a drink of tea how I want to answer that one. So Tony, it's both. And for years, I tried to fight that whole fact that I'm a Notre Dame fan and I have to be objective and all those kind of things. And I think I've done a pretty good job over the years of becoming objective, meaning I'm just going to try to look at things and evaluate them as I see them. And if something needs to be praised, I'll praise somebody for it. If it's a criticism, I'll criticize them for it, and just being objective in that regards. But what I've also tried to do, especially since I've kind of started my own business, is over the last 6 months, especially, I've come to realize that it's not fun having to hold back your emotions and things like that. And if something happens, like people were talking about how energized I looked when we were talking about the Brandon Vernon commitment, and I'm like, you know what? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I've never hidden the fact that I'm a Notre Dame fan, and I think I've earned your respect enough, all of your respect enough to know that I'm going to call it like I see it. That doesn't mean I'm always right, but I'm going to call it like I see it. So if something's fun or exciting or something to be happy about, I want to share in that emotion with other Notre Dame fans while still being objective and still being a professional. And I think you can do that. And so it's a little bit of both. Now, do things ruin my night? No. Do I get in a salty mood if Notre Dame doesn't play well or coach well? Yes. But having been a coach where my work went into us winning or losing, that could ruin my day, could ruin my night. This is one of those things where I have no control over what Notre Dame does or doesn't do. So I have emotions about it. I have feelings about it, but it's not something where, it completely ruins my night. It used to be that way for me, but I feel like doing this job has given me an outlet to kind of channel that into an analytical manner of responding to it, where it takes away some of the emotion, the reactive emotion to it. But it doesn't mean that I don't feel passionate about it. So I would say I have come to embrace the passion that I have for Notre Dame without the emotion of it, is really what I'm trying to balance. AJ says, Brian, I used to listen to you and Lou's podcast, rest in peace, for BGI. I was wondering if you could shed a little light on your time there. I feel like you used to be a little more reserved on that podcast, and now that you have your own platform, you're much more open and critical in a good way, and you speak voice your opinion way more now. Am I off on that? No, you're not off on that. Like, look, part of the reason, AJ, that I wanted to start my own site and my own channel, my own platform, is because I wanted to be able to say and do what I wanted to do without someone saying, I have to protect this relationship, or, I have to protect this person's feelings, or I can't be critical of that. And, I just want to be able to speak my mind. And as long as it's coming from a place where I feel like I have. So, for example, you've never heard me say Mike Bray needs to be fired or Mike Bray needs to go or anything like that, because I don't feel I have the knowledge or the background, the experience to professionally stand here and say to you that Mike Bray needs to do this, that, and the other. I don't have it. So I treat that more like a reporter, where I'm just going to report the news of what, and I may share my opinion on that, but I don't feel like I could sit there and say, like, Mike Bray has done a poor job coaching the offense because they're this, and this. I can recognize that maybe they're not shooting well, or they need to be better on defense, and I'll have some opinions, but I'm going to be more reserved in how strong I am with my feelings or my analysis of the basketball program, because I simply don't have the expertise as a basketball analyst to make those opinions. Football is a different deal. And I feel like I do have an expertise and a background that allows me to give more critical advice when it's warranted. And I think the mistake I made very early on in my career doing this, I don't think it is something I believe I made a mistake on, is I felt like I was too critical in how I wrote, where it was sort of like I was still in coaching mode. And in coaching mode, there's always constructive criticism going on. And I wasn't doing, in my opinion, enough praising. It was always like critiquing. I don't say criticizing, but critiquing. I've tried to balance that a little bit more as I've gotten older and gotten more used to being on this end of it as opposed to the coaching end of it. But, I also feel like, AJ, I want to be able to share my opinion. And if some people like it, then there's other places they can go. If you're someone who always wants to hear that everything is wonderful, that's fine. I respect that. But there's other places for you. There's plenty of Homer places out there that you can go to. If you're someone who wants to just always be negative and always say and be surrounded by other negative people, and it's, no matter what Brian Kelly does, it's never good enough, that's fine. I respect that. But this isn't really necessarily the place for you either. There are places you can go there for that. Not as many, but there are places you can go there for that. I want to be at a place where we can enjoy and praise the successes, where we can be critical of the areas where they're coming short, where people who are maybe more homerish in their views but accepting of other views can be here. People that are more critical of their reviews but not going to not going to personally attack a person who's more on the homer side, where it's more of a forum where I want multiple opinions and ideas, knowing that I'm going to have different views and opinions. And that's what I wanted to do, because at the end of the day, AJ, yes, I need to be able to make enough money and support my family and those kind of things. But I'm doing that. What I want to do is I wanted to create a community where people could come and talk and share ideas and share opinions and be accepted. And that doesn't mean that, we're not going to criticize or push back or argue or debate or even be passionate in our differences of opinion. But there's still going to be a level of respect there. And at the end of the day, I want to be able to put my head on the pillow at night when I lay down and rest and be like, did I honor my family? Did I honor, my God? Did I give the people that are spending their time and money in honest day's work? And the only way I can do that is by being honest and sharing my opinion. And I'm going to be right sometimes, going to be wrong sometimes, but you're always going to get my honest opinion. And that's why the one thing I would say I do get a little sensitive to and react strongly to is when people say things like, give me your honest opinion, as if I don't already do that. Like, okay, you're kind of accusing me of not being honest with you. If I don't want to say something, I'll say what I said earlier. That's about all I'm going to say on that. There's more to it, but I'm not going to speak on it, because this isn't the time, the place, or my right or my business to say that, because if the source would have known I'm going to go and say it, then they wouldn't have told it to me in the first place. So I don't feel it's my place to go share. But other than that, if I'm not going to spin something because it's going to help Notre Dame. If say, hey, hey, can you say this publicly because it's going to help this kid? If I don't believe it, I'm not going to say it. But if I believe it, then I'll say it anyway. You don't need to tell me that. And so I don't know whether you enjoyed that or not, AJ, but yeah, that's where it was. And I also felt like with Lou, because Lou was so reserved and really didn't like to be critical, I also wanted to respect that. So I had to sometimes be mindful of, I didn't want to make him uncomfortable in a podcast. So that's why a lot of times my sharper criticisms for Coach Kelly and the staff when I was at BGI was more in a written format or on the message board as opposed to in a podcast, because I really wanted to make sure that I didn't put Lou, who, as you all know, I had a tremendous amount of respect for and considered a friend who, lived near me before his passing. I didn't want to put him in a situation where he felt he had to push back against my negativity, because that wasn't what he wanted to do. And I didn't want to put him in that situation or make him feel uncomfortable. And so I hope that answers that question. Okay, technical technician asks, Brian, while I'm happy for the athletes, what unforeseen casualties do you see arising from NIL? Any person knows they will come. Any sane person, I think you should probably say, I don't know. There's going to be problems. While the free market is the best system ever established and has lifted more people out of poverty than any history, there's always trade-offs and consequences for everything. Yeah, and that's kind of thing that, I'm not going to get into political debates, but people say, well, capitalism is this. Well, just because somebody says they're a capitalist doesn't mean that they're experiencing capitalism. There's not a whole lot of free market going on in our country right now. And this is kind of one of those things where if this is truly about just the market, then I support that. And I support opportunities. I don't think they should necessarily put caps on certain things, but there's a lot of dangers from this. Number one is, some of these kids are going to start getting hit up when they're 15, 16 years old. And I have to ask, are they prepared to handle that? Should they have to handle that? And do they have families that are capable of handling that? What protections are we putting in place to make sure that people who are professionals, who are, think about it. Like, a college football coach is paid hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars to be able to convince you to come play for him. There is a level of manipulation that goes on there, just even if it's a natural and it's above board and those kind of things. Well, same thing in business. I mean, these people are the best in the business, are good at convincing you of things that maybe aren't true. Hey, I don't really need a car, but that guy made a great case for why I should probably buy a car. I think I look at all the people like, hey, I didn't want to buy a house. I wasn't really in financial position to buy a house, but boy, that guy made a convincing argument should buy a house. And that's why people get into mortgages and loans that ultimately they were not positioned to handle. And then they end up going, underwater in those situations. So that's what those people are going to do. And now those people are being sicked on college athletes, essentially. And that's where my frustration comes from the NCAAs. There's no protections in place. There's no guidance in place. There's no, hey, let's do this. Hey, we know that these laws are being passed, but we're going to ask these states to say, hey, give us 2 more months, to do these things, to make sure we've put some protections in place for these young people to make sure that they still are able to balance their class requirements, that they're still able to balance their athletic requirements, and that we're also putting protections in place to make sure that they're not being taken advantage of. So maybe you can come up with laws to say, hey, if you want to engage with a college athlete, here's the deal. You can only have a certain, you have to be honest and upfront about, the money that you're making off of this, or whatever the case may be, or you need to make sure that you put in writing what this, that, and the other thing. And here's the process with which you can contact student athletes, and to make sure that when a kid's sitting there at 8:00 at night and he's got an exam the next morning and he's sitting there thinking about, I got this econ final tomorrow in the morning and it's 8 p.m. and I've got all these business people in my DMs and all these agents in my DMs and all these marketing companies in my DMs trying to get me to go with them on something, but I'm trying to study for this final. What are the protections for those kids for those situations? Why aren't we worried about that? And I think the people who, to me, have dropped the ball the most is the media. I think we in the media have kind of just turned this into like, hey, let's be all, pro player and all these other kind of things. Well, then pro player simply turned into this lame, weak, lazy, ham kind of thing, without any thought of how this is going to impact young people in all parts of their lives, right? Simply just giving kids money is only a moron, in my opinion, would think that simply giving them money is going to make everything better. Why else do all these people that win the lottery go through all these problems and issues and things like that? There's been story after story after story about that. What are we doing to make sure that we're protecting these young people and making sure that we're still protecting the idea of the student athlete? Okay. And we're going to redefine amateurism. And I'm cool with that, because I think the way that the NCAA defined amateurism was stupid and archaic and in a lot of ways dumb. but not getting into the whole their employees, their players thing. Or let's directly pay them for being a football player, or, give them a cut of what the NCAA makes. That's a bunch of noise for me. That's a bunch of lawyers and people who want to get a cut of that. That's all that is. That's not actually caring about young people. It's not caring about young people at all. It's about you're trying to be, cool and hip and liked and all those other kind of things about, hey, I'm pro player. No, you're not. No, you're not. Because simply saying that you want to get a money isn't pro player. Someone who's pro player says, hey, we want you to be able to profit as much as possible off of your name, image, and likeness. But at the same time, what an institution of higher learning is supposed to be about is developing the entire person. So, yes, we're going to help you enhance your name, image, and likeness, but we still care about your academic aspects. We still care about your mental health aspects. We still care about your time management. We still care about the athletic part of things. We want to make sure that we're protecting you from those leeches in society that we all know exist that are now going to look to take advantage of this new revenue stream to get their piece of the pie. Not the players, but they want to take advantage of the players to get their piece of the pie. And that's my frustration. And that, to me, to answer your question, is the biggest pothole, is that we're going to lose sight. And we've already done it in a lot of ways. And this is why I despise the media. If you really care about helping young people, then how about you demand that colleges start giving these kids actual educations? Why do you tear Notre Dame down when instead you should be lifting Notre Dame up and saying, hey, Notre Dame's been in the playoff 2 of the last 3 years, and their kids take real classes, they get real degrees, and they're actually being prepared to be successful human beings in 4 to 5 years, not just being used to play football. And then when they're no longer useful to you, you kick into the curb, and you've given them no real education. You've created no sense of accountability with them away from football. You've made them think that it's okay to not pay attention to classes, or get the cheerleader to do their homework, or to get a teacher who's a pro football player, or to have cops in towns let these players off of crimes because they happen to be football players. You're teaching them nothing. And if the media cared about young people like they claim they do, but they don't, then they'd be focusing on those things, not, oh, let's get him some money. Because, okay, a kid made $100,000, but they did not take, hey, he's not taking any, has no idea how to handle that money. How many of us at 18, 19 years old were ready to handle that kind of money and that kind of influence? Very, very few of us. And we're not doing things to kind of prepare them to protect them from that. It's absolutely insane to me. And it's not woke. It's not caring. It's not love. It's not support. It's childish to me. It's, oh, we're pro player. No, you're not. No, you're not. You're pro being liked. That's all you care about. You don't care about the players. You just want to be perceived as being pro player, when in reality you're not, because people who are pro player would be willing to make tough choices. If you're a parent and you have a kid that wants to do something that is not going to be good for him, well, I want him to like me, so I let him do whatever he wants. That's not good parenting. Good parenting is sometimes saying, hey, I know you think this is the right thing, but it's not. And let me, as an adult, as someone who's been through this, let me show you the consequences of this. Let me help guide you through this. That's what people who care about people do. And that's where the media has completely lost its way. It's supposed to be a third rail, a third party, but instead the media is picking winners and losers, and the sports media has picked the players as the winners, and anti-establishment this and saying, instead of saying, hey, look, here's what the NCAA sucks, but we still need something to replace it to provide some structure and some guidance and protection of these young people, and make sure that we're still helping and that we still care about developing them holistically. AJ says, have a feeling things might be trending a tiny bit downward, or at least remaining neutral with Merriweather. Was hoping that he would be committed by now. I never expected him to be committed by now, AJ. I don't think things are trending away. I think things are staying where they have been. Look, this is why we have to make sure that we don't react too much to what happens in a visit, and then the things that follow a visit with the projections and the crystal balls and the future cast. I've been saying to you before the visits, I've been saying to you after the visits. With Tobias Merriweather, Notre Dame did a great job, but I've never made it seem to you, I don't think, and I hope I haven't, that this was going to happen this summer. I have said for a while now, if he decides this summer, I think it's going to be Notre Dame. But I have also said that Tobias is saying the same things now that he said before the visits, which is he has said he wants to decide in the winter. That's what he said. So I don't understand why people are surprised. Oh, I know why. It's because we aren't looking at crystal balls the right way. And this is not a knock on crystal balls at all. I said last week, I think it's an ingenious business strategy. And I think it's been really great for that company. But I think we as consumers of the information and of the news have kind of looked at them as something that they aren't. And we react to them in ways that we probably shouldn't. And so I don't think anything has changed with Tobias Merriweather. I have always had this concern that this is what it's going to be, in my opinion. AJ also says, Omar Austin, first of all, hey, IB fam, welcome back to the show, Omar. Glad that you're with us today. AJ also says, if they miss on Tobias, I hope they're able to get Andre Green Jr. on campus. He looks like he has 5-star upside. Granted, I'm basing that solely on one-handed catches and athleticism and not regarding any actual football knowledge and IQ because I have zero playing or coaching experience. Let me say something right now. You do not have to be a former coach or a former player to have knowledge or expertise on football. If you love football and you watch football and you study football and you try to learn from people who did maybe coach or play, then you can have opinions, and they can be knowledgeable opinions, and they can be informed opinions. And so that's why we do some of the shows that we do, and that's something that I want this channel to be about. So, look, I want you to have an opinion. I want you to know where that opinion comes from and be able to defend that opinion, and hopefully we can help them do that. So, yeah, I at least appreciate your honesty in that regards. But I don't think he has quite 5-star upside. But I think Andre Green Jr. is very good. I like Andre Green Jr. a lot. My issue there is, again, he's kind of similar to some of those other guys, but he's very good, but he's not Tobias Merriweather, in my opinion. Would he be a really good sort of consolation prize? Yeah, he would definitely be that. But I don't see that one happening. I don't think Andre Green Jr. has a ton of interest in Notre Dame. And I think if he did, he would have been on campus this summer. And D-Rock, I don't know enough about D-Rock says, read a May 21 article I placed out on my Twitter account regarding a name, image, likeness. So just people who may not know this, NIL stands for name, image, likeness. Do you know 9 states do not require a person to file a state tax return for income earned? I don't know enough about that. I did see the article that you sent me, but I haven't had a chance to read through that yet, so I'm not going to really address that one. And hopefully tomorrow's mailbag, maybe ask that again, D-Rock, and hopefully I'll have a better understanding of that situation. Jacob, love the mailbags. I hope to learn more about the NIL situation, how the players actually make money, and if there is any oversight. This is great news for athletes, but I imagine a ton of abuse. And that's my issue, is there is no oversight. Now, schools can try to provide some oversight, but the NCAA has not given them any. It's like the NCAA has basically removed any teeth away from these schools, especially the schools that don't have, at least in states where they've passed laws for NIL, there's some guidance from the state law, but like Indiana not only doesn't have a law, but there's not even a bill that's been proposed, I don't believe, as far as NIL. So if you're Notre Dame, you have no teeth to say, hey, man, don't do that. There needs to be some guidance to say, hey, look, we should probably, as student athletes, there's probably some businesses we don't want to get in bed with. And that's the thing, is these college coaches are left to sort of just real quickly scrambling together to figure out what's going on. And to me, that's just an incredible lack of leadership and guidance from politicians who are just passing these laws without any thought or consequences about what this may mean or what the timing may mean, or it's because it's again, it's all about, trying to come across as like that really hip person, and we're pro player and we're pro worker and all these other kind of things, without actually passing laws that in any way, shape, form, or fashion actually give protections to these players. Because it's, at the end of the day, for a lot of these people, it's not about the players. It's not about the players at all. AJ says, Freeman and Nelson are proving that signing top-tier talent for Notre Dame football is possible. Do you think in some ways they could also be proof that Bray could bring in better talent as well? I don't think I don't think football, and we'll talk about basketball and NIL here in a second, but I don't think football and basketball are in the same universe when it comes to recruiting. And John, thank you very, very much for the super chat. Very, very much. Let me get back to this question, AJ, because this is a good one, but I wanted to recognize that. Oh, looks like I lost the question. They kicked me out. So shoot, AJ. The question was about Bray. So they booted me. StreamYard kills me. So I lost some of the questions. But anyway, I do know your question. So number one, what Freeman has done and what Elston and Freeman as a combination have done, and hopefully Freeman and Mickens and Freeman and Chris O'Leary is they've shown that, number one, you're Notre Dame. You do not back away from Ohio State. You do not back away from Alabama. You do not back away from Clemson or Oklahoma or Texas or USC or Florida or Florida State or Miami or anybody else. You're Notre Dame. Now, are you going to lose battles? Yes. And more often than not, if you sign 25 players, there's a chance you lost as many battles or even more than you won. But the thing that you need to do as far as for the big players, the thing is, though, you need to win enough of those battles to where you have a kind of roster that can go toe-to-toe with anybody. And then that success then leads to you winning those battles the next time. And Freeman has said, look, we're not gonna be afraid to go into Ohio and battle Ohio State. We're not going to be afraid to go into the West Coast and battle USC. We're not going to be afraid to go to South Carolina and battle the SEC for Jalen Sneed. We're not afraid to go down to Florida and battle Florida and Alabama for Devin Moore. Now, they may lose some of those battles. They will lose some of those battles. Not specifically those players, but they will lose some of those battles. But you're going to lose them every time if you don't fight them. And to me, that's what we're seeing on offense, is we're seeing this particular group of coaches sort of settle for good players and not battle enough for the great players. And they're losing most of those battles for the great players. I mean, they will have lost their top target at quarterback. They will have lost their top 3 targets at running back. Maybe they get their top target at wide receiver. Tight end, they did well. And you could argue that if they don't get Billy Schrauth or Zach Rice, you could argue that they lost, 5 of their 6 top targets on the offensive line? And that's been a problem too, is whereas Harry Hiestand kind of said, okay, I want that guy, that guy, that guy, that guy, and he'd get 3 of them, 3 of the 4, if not all 4. Whereas now it's like, okay, they've been fortunate that they've had some Indiana kids that have been top players, but other than that, they're losing a lot of the battles for top level players and losing them to schools they have no business. Think about it. They lost to West Virginia. They're losing to Penn. Penn State is killing Notre Dame in offensive recruiting right now. How is that even possible? How are they beating them for Drew Aller, possibly Nicholas Singleton, Caden Saunders, Drew Shelton? I mean, is there anybody on offense that Notre Dame has beat them for besides Holden Stace? That's problematic. So I think didn't they have a losing record last year? Notre Dame's coming off a playoff appearance, and they're smacking you on offense. That's not happening on defense. Matter of fact, they're not even really battling Penn State for kids on defense because Penn State's not even the same league where Notre Dame is. I mean, when Marcus Freeman arrived, Penn State, everybody thought Penn State was going to get Aiden Guevara. Marcus Freeman arrives with him and Mike Elson, done deal. He's with Notre Dame. That's not happening on offense. Now, speaking to what that says to the basketball team, nothing. Because football and basketball are 2 completely different animals. Basketball is with football. Football players, football prospects have a greater understanding of the need to get a college education because there is the 3-year rule. They can't go pro for at least 3 years. And because the number of players that ends up going pro, the lifespan of pros, you think about it, you say, well, there's fewer NBA players than there are NFL players. Well, number one, there's also way more college football players than college basketball players. But there's also, don't they still have the CBA? There's the G League. There's all these European leagues. There's leagues down south. I had a friend of mine growing up who played in Israel. He played, I think, in Spain. He played in South America. There's China leagues that have basketball American players. I mean, there's all types of places to go play professional basketball. In football, it's like, you're not making really big money in the CFL, and then if there's no CFL in the NFL, then there are no other football. You're playing semi-pro with a bunch of dudes from your hometown, So you need to be better prepared for that. The thing that Notre Dame can then sell in football is the development, the academics. You're going to come to Notre Dame, you're going to play championship football, you're going to get a degree from Notre Dame, because nowadays, if you're not getting a degree in 3 years, it's because you don't want a degree in 3 years. I mean, especially for as many early enrollees as a place like Notre Dame is lying, which is a great move by Notre Dame, by the way, to kind of get over that mental thing of bringing in early enrollees. That is such a good thing for the student athletes, and I'm glad that they've done that. But with basketball, with the elite players, it's like that whole academic thing means nothing. I mean, if you're a basketball player, you're really only going to school for a semester. Your grades only matter for a semester. And then in the spring, you're not really going to class because you're on the road so much that a lot of your classes are virtual, or, you're getting excuses for them because you're on a road trip, a league road trip this week. So you're not in class. And so it doesn't matter. So, I mean, those kids in basketball, they're not even sniffing a degree at Notre Dame. And so all that matters for them is, okay, where's the place that's going to help me go and get to the NBA as quickly as possible? Well, at Notre Dame, you have to still go to class. You can't play basketball and not go to class. You can't play basketball and do some of the things that these other schools allow these kids to do. And so there's nothing that Mike Brey can do about that. Now, does that mean that Mike Brey's recruiting is as good as he should be recruiting? I'm not saying that either. But what I am saying is Mike Brey recruiting at an elite level for Notre Dame, in my opinion, is not going to look like it does for Kentucky or Duke or Michigan. And that's just the reality. Now, maybe you can get there someday, but I just don't see that being the case, because what makes Notre Dame special and unique for football is not even something that you can use for an elite player in basketball. Now, it works for like top 50 players and top 100 players, guys that don't view themselves as one and dones, but for the elite players that most of them view themselves as one and dones, it just doesn't have the same message. It doesn't have the same impact. DBZ, the tax man is coming. Hopefully they hire a good tax person. So you're with me. You're seeing right through all these legislatures that are passing these laws. They're just trying to tap into another revenue stream. They're not exactly caring about these student athletes. Call me cynical, but I've been following politics my whole life, and if they all of a sudden they actually started caring about people, that this was a first for everything. D-Rock, wonder how the Indy Billboard PR ties in with NIL. That was absolutely part of it. That was part of Notre Dame's thing is, look, Notre Dame has been selling the branding aspect of recruits for a while now. And that's not coming from it's not. It's like sometimes, like if Notre Dame calls you and tells you, hey, look, this is what we're doing. It's great. Cool. I'll talk about it. But you take it with a grain of salt because that's their side of things. Where I get my impression from how impactful this stuff has been for Notre Dame is what I'm hearing from the players, what I'm hearing from parents, what I'm hearing from recruits about how impactful it is. So the billboard thing, for example, was huge. It's Notre Dame promoting their players, throwing their weight around as an institution, as a brand, as a holistic brand, to then build up the brand of the individual players. This is something I've tried to tell young people that I try to hire. It's like, look, when you come over here, yes, your number one responsibility is to make sure that you represent Irish Breakdown well, and you've got to do certain things, and this is how I expect you to conduct yourself. But look, I also want to help build your brand up, and I'm hoping that that's something someday that message will mean something. But I think that's important, and that's what Notre Dame has done, and that's what I think has impacted from a recruiting standpoint and will continue to do so. Corey D says, I just got in here, Brian. I take it we are not getting Singleton. We talked about this at the beginning of the show, Corey. I'll encourage you to go back and watch that. But I do want to say quickly here that right now, I believe it was Tom Loy reported that, man, they are killing me with these questions. I'm going to see if I can find some of these questions on the live stream, but I got booted again another 15 minutes. So I apologize to people for that. But so what I'm hearing is, Corey, is it's not looking good for Notre Dame right now with him, obviously. And he is definitely headed in a different direction at this point in time. So, we'll kind of see how that goes. But, yeah, they're not doing well. Let's see here. Let's try to get caught. Let's see here. And we're going to boot that guy. It's amazing how many strange people. Hey, look, y'all, in the future, when some clown like that comes into the chat, just ignore him. All right. Or if one of y'all who has my number, just shoot me a text or something like that. Say, hey, there's somebody acting like an idiot in the channel, so we're going to get rid of him because he's now gone. So let's get back up here to grown folk business. Okay, David Anthony, you had another comment, I believe, before that, so we'll get to that. Kai Stokes can play both safety or cornerback. He is there for insurance for Ohio State because, as if everyone knows, schools recruit many for the certain position to avoid late decommitments. Okay, so clearly an Ohio State fan has jumped into this, I believe. I missed the first part of your comment, but the fact is they only have so many scholarships, David. They're not taking 9 defensive backs in this class, okay? They are telling kids that this is what you're going to play. They're not, and if you say, okay, all these 5 kids are corners, A, players are going to believe that, and B, you still don't have the numbers to do that. So that's all fine and dandy, but I mean that doesn't really work. So because of that, fella, we got a bunch of questions got booted down. So so if you asked a question above David's question and I didn't get to it, I apologize. Can you resubmit it, please? Because that clown made a lot of stupid posts, which bumped everything down, and now I've lost a lot of questions. So I apologize for that. Joseph Salvatore says, pretty disappointing if we lose out on Singleton. Jadarian Price looks like a very good back, but we need to land guys at the top of our board eventually if we want to beat Ohio State, Clemson, and Alabama. So, yeah, I agree with that, Joseph. And it's just the consistency of it is kind of the problem for me. They're losing guys at that position on a relatively consistent basis. And to me, that's problematic. John Rich says, Brian, you said that 2023 is a great year for quarterbacks nationally. I agree. That is, I did say that. Since Notre Dame struck out with the top 3 running backs in 2022, is there a deep pool from which to choose with the 2023 group? I assume you're talking about running backs. John, I've only seen about 8 or 9 running backs, and so far there's some very good backs, but it doesn't look to be as deep of a year at running back as it was in 22. And that was one of the reasons Notre Dame tried to get a second back, which we've talked about earlier, is the fact that, this is one of those situations where Notre Dame was trying to take advantage of the fact, that it was a loaded year. And the reality is that, yes, they got a very good player in Jadarian Price, as Joseph mentioned, but they wanted in another one and they missed. And we could say that, yeah, they're still going to be okay. And they are. But they would have been even better with the guys they have, plus a Nicholas Singleton or Dallin Hayden. The fact is they got beat for him. And I don't so far love the running back group in 2023. I also don't necessarily have the confidence that Lance Taylor is going to be able to go out and get one of the top backs in 2023. I would imagine that right now, based on what he's proven, is that it's going to be a situation that unless Tommy Rees can help close the way that Chip Long helped close, and so far we haven't seen that, although I'm optimistic he can get to that point, then it has to be a legitimate concern at this point in time. Antoine says, I saw on Instagram that Cardinal Tate's commitment date is November 14th. That is when I think that's like a parent's birthday or something like that. That is when he's going to go public. I think Notre Dame's hope is that they can kind of basically get him in the fold before then and just keep it quiet. And that's something they've done plenty of times in the past. If you remember correctly, in 2019, when they signed Isaiah Foskey, he actually signed in December. But Notre Dame kept it quiet, didn't say anything because he wanted to make his announcement with his high school team and on, I think it was like in February. So they've done that before. Chris Ayers says Shipley and Singleton hurts putting 1 or 2 eggs in a basket. PSU is on 5 other top 200 backs, according to 247. So the chance they get 2 of their top 5 on the board is looking pretty good. I would say this year's a little bit different than the Will Shipley thing. I think the Will Shipley situation was that they literally put all their eggs in that basket. And when they missed, they got lucky and that Terry Joseph was able to kind of bail them out with Logan Diggs and then obviously got Aldrick Estime. But the thing about getting Aldrick Estime is who was the big-time school that they were going against? It was Michigan State? I mean, they didn't beat Bama and Ohio State and Clemson for Aldrick Estime. That doesn't mean he's not a good player. It just means that they're not winning the battles against the top. They've gotten – Tony Alford owns Lance Taylor right now. He owned Autry Denson. He has owned every running back coach they had, and Lance Taylor did not recruit in a way that was going to help him close the deal. He recruited in a way that hurt all the other efforts that were being put in to that recruitment. He got beat by Oklahoma for Gavin Sawchuk. I mean, he's not beating the big-time schools. And the one win he had, as I've said before, anyone that covers recruiting, anyone tied into that situation knows, if it wasn't for Chip Long stepping in there, Chris Tyree's probably at Oklahoma right now. That's just how that one went down. So that's problematic. But again, Jadarian Price isn't a consolation prize. He was a guy that they wanted. So they did get a plan A guy at running back in this class. They did. So it's a little different than last year, whereas they had to salvage the class of Diggs and Estime last year. Jadarian Price was a plan A guy from the beginning, which is why they took his commitment when they did. When he committed to Notre Dame, and I've mentioned this before, but Chris, when he committed to Notre Dame, at the time, Notre Dame was at least the leader or co-leader for all 3 of those running backs, and definitely in good position with Sawchuk and Singleton. So they took him knowing that they couldn't take both of those guys. So Jadarian Price is a good running back, but the situation for Jadarian Price is a little bit different because, again, you didn't exactly beat a great program to get him. I mean, they beat, Texas, who already had an elite back in the class and at the time was a bit of let's be honest, a bit of a dumpster fire program. I mean, he had some impressive offers. USC offered him and Ohio State offered him, but he wasn't a guy that Ohio State was pushing for. They weren't really recruiting him at the time. So he's going to have to step it up. There's no question. He's going to have to step it up. Jonathan says, I'll be a day one subscriber. I appreciate that very, very much. And I look forward to really growing that part of this community as well. Tyler says, DB recruiting starting to sound like wide receiver recruiting. And hold off on that one. No, hold off on that one. I don't agree with that. Let's let this one, you know what I'm going to say. You know what I'm going to say. Brandon says, hoping Notre Dame now takes 2 running backs in 2023. Justice Haynes and Cedric Irvin, both studs and seem to be great fits for Notre Dame. Yes, so did Nicholas Singleton, and so did Gavin Sawchuk, and so did Dallin Hayden. They were also studs that seemed like to be great fits for Notre Dame. Got to close. Those are both very good backs, but you got to close. Okay. Chris Ayers says, according to 247, Notre Dame has 3 offers for running backs in the 2023 as of date. To put in perspective, Penn State currently has 9 running backs they've offered. That's not exactly accurate. Notre Dame, by my count, has offered 6 running backs. You have to remember that 247 has like athlete categories and all other types of things. Per my count, Notre Dame has offered 6 running backs in the 2023 class. But just because they haven't offered, they've only offered 3 quarterbacks, but I know for a fact Tommy Rees is recruiting at least 8 or 9 guys, at least. So offers don't always mean there's some guys that they may not offer because they know if we offer that guy, he's going to want to commit to us. But there's higher guys on our board. We're not ready to take that commitment. So, that can be part of the process as well. Michael O'Brien, with Singleton, let's say Notre Dame goes 12-0. Penn State loses at Michigan, at Wisconsin, at Iowa, at Ohio State, splits Auburn and Indiana, and splits Michigan and Michigan State. 7-5 season. Could they flip Singleton? That all sounds fine and dandy, but he's about to commit to Penn State. If that happens in a year where Notre Dame just went 10-2 and went to the college football playoff, and Penn State went 4-5. So I don't see how that would really have much of an impact. I don't think this was about the team's record. I think this was about a couple things. One thing that is working in Penn State's favor is the running back depth chart in the classes that are right in front of him is far more favorable at Penn State. And there's a lot of pressure to stay in state. It's not like they lost to Ohio State or Alabama or Texas A&M. They're losing them to the in-state school. Now, that's not an excuse. I'm just saying the circumstances are different, which means it's not about the win-loss record is what I mean by that. It's just – and the win-loss record isn't necessarily going to do that. Now, where that could change is if they go 7-5 and all of a sudden James Franklin's in trouble, or James Franklin does another complete offensive overhaul, then that could change. But the fact of the matter is that since Penn State made their new staff hires on offense this offseason, beginning in January, they have whooped Notre Dame on the recruiting trail on offense. Defensively, different animal. But offensively, they're getting whooped right now. Bert says, hey, Brian, I'm from Youngstown, Ohio, and understand that Ohio State, the Ohio State thing very well. Is it more important that we get a kid like Vernon, or should the emphasis be about the staff going anywhere for the big boys? I think it's both, Bert. I think it's a very good question. I think Ohio, to me, carries a little bit of a different weight because Ohio is a state where Notre Dame should have a little bit more success. Now, listen. Ohio State is always going to do great in that state. And when you look back in the day when Notre Dame was getting a lot of top Ohio players, a lot of them went to Catholic schools. I would say that Notre Dame has never really done well with public school kids. Now they're going to get 2 kids in a 3-year span, hopefully 3 kids in a 3-year span if they can get Sonny Styles that are public school kids, which is different. And so you look at Brendan Vernon, he's a public school kid. That matters a little bit different. And because it's important because also, Indiana doesn't have elite talent. Michigan has really good talent, but not to the level of Ohio. Illinois is not the program it used to, is not the state it used to be when it comes to producing the volume of top players. that it used to produce that was pro Notre Dame. Ohio's the only regional state that you could say offers you the kind of high-end talent and depth that maybe a Southern school does. And if Ohio State basically just put a wall around the state to where you're only going to get, if you're Notre Dame, you're only going to get what we don't want, or, one position like offensive line when Harry Hiestand was here, because that was, Harry Hiestand's the only coach that's been able to go with any consistency beat Ohio State for kids, especially even Ohio kids. That just hasn't happened in a while. So I think I'm at the position now with your question, Bert, where Ohio carries even a different weight because it is a local state. Like Brendan Vernon doesn't live that far away from Notre Dame. It's not like it's not like you got to drive to Florida or Georgia. That's one where you kind of get in the car the morning before a 3:30 game and be there before kickoff. You know what I mean? Like that's a plus. And if Notre Dame can get one or two kids a year, and I'm not talking about just one or two kids from Ohio. I'm talking about one or two kids that Ohio State wants. That's going to be an impact because it's Lorenzo Styles type of kids. It's Brennan Vernon type of kids. It's Liam Eichenberg type of kids. It's Sonny Styles type of kids. It's those kind of guys that are going to be the difference between you getting good players from Ohio and you getting great players from Ohio. And if you can start that kind of that trend, it's going to let you keep getting more and more and more because young people like to there's some kids that say, look, I like Ohio. I grew up Ohio State fan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there's going to be some kids who maybe didn't grow up Ohio State fans, or they did, but they also have that spirit of, I want to blaze my own trail. And that's where Notre Dame needs to be able to step in. Coleman Smith says, who are the realistic options for receiver in 2023 besides Tayton Brown? I think it's a little bit too early to really have a board. I mean, they've offered a ton of receivers in 2023. I've mentioned like Jalen Hale in the past. Right now I don't see that one happening. Noah Rogers is a kid I have my eye on that I'd like to see kind of go. Jaquez Petaway, I believe, is likes Notre Dame. I believe Nathaniel Joseph from Florida. Brandon Ennis recently released a list that did not have Notre Dame on it, so I wouldn't think too much of him. Raymond Cottrell is a guy that they're trying to get in on. I don't know if there's anybody besides those two that I feel like are at this point really realistic options that would be gap closers for Notre Dame. It's early yet, but we got to see how it plays out. Joseph Salvatore, the running back question. Thanks for the mailbag show, Brian. If Notre Dame misses on Singleton, will they go after Payne, Alston, or Judkins? No on the latter two. Payne is a little bit of a different scenario because I think there's a little bit more open-mindedness to him because he did miss last year with an injury. And he had really good sophomore film. So I think if Jabron Payne can come back from that knee injury and show explosiveness and be successful, and assuming he has a profile, an academic profile that will allow Notre Dame to be successful, then I think that's a situation where they could maybe make a run at him. Right now, I don't think that they're going to make a run at anybody, but I do think they're going to be open-minded enough to say, hey, let's see if a kid that maybe we thought was a plan B plays like a plan A guy. I think that would be the change. Okay, so I'm down here to this part of the questions where I see a lot of people asking me to boot a guy. What you have to understand is I can only see so many questions at a time. And if I scroll down too far, then I'm going to miss those. So what happened is you have a lot of you were kind of going after this troll, this idiot that was posting in our chat. But what you did is there's like 15, 20 comments in response to him. So, I'm going to lose a lot of that stuff and I can't get down there. If you just ignore idiots like that, maybe hit me up with a text message, or if some of you that have that, I should probably try to, especially when Vince isn't here, it's a little harder to do that, but I appreciate some of you letting me know that he was there, but it's best to just ignore idiots like that because you guys responded to him and debating him. That's what he wants. He wants to ruffle your feathers because apparently he is doesn't have anything else better to do with his life. It's best to just ignore people like that, which, trust me, I know can be hard to do. Allison T asks, how will Notre Dame deal with the NIL stuff? Will it hurt us in competition with schools from bigger metro areas, or will it give us a leg up on the competition? So I expressed at the beginning of the show my personal opinion on the NIL stuff. Allison, I think from strictly a Notre Dame perspective, I think this is going to be huge for Notre Dame. Look, I know that Notre Dame doesn't have the best football program right now. I mean, that's Alabama, that's Clemson, Ohio State all have better football programs. But from a branding standpoint, there still is no bigger brand than Notre Dame. There isn't one. And if the staff plays this right, this could be big time. This could be big time. So, yeah, I think this is something that's going to benefit Notre Dame quite a bit. And then Michael O'Brien says, I think Notre Dame can go a lot more big national brands as a good marketing tool for those companies. If you listen to Notre Dame players in general talk its lights out. Agree completely. Tracy Tipton says, love the show. Brian, you and Vince are awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. Chili asks, Brian, what is the current situation of the German kid, Ahrensberger? How's his weight and development? Is he a possible transfer? I don't see him as a possible transfer right now, Chili. I think he came to Notre Dame knowing he was a project, right? I mean, they were honest with him. You're going to need time to develop. There was a lot of older kids in front of him. From what I'm told, they like him. I mean, he's a big, strong kid. He's like 6'7". He's almost 260 pounds now. You saw him when he got in the game last year against South Florida. I mean, he was getting after it. He's just really raw. But my understanding is they like him, and there's a future there. I don't think he's a transfer candidate unless there's a, like a family situation that arises, which is what happened with Devin Upau. He didn't leave because he was unhappy or playing time or anything else like that. There was a family situation that put him in a spot where he really needed to be closer to home. So unless something like that happens, but I mean, Alexander's family's in Germany, so I don't see that. They like him. From what I'm told, he's happy at Notre Dame, but he's just still growing. He's still developing. He's going to need some time, no question about it. OC Irish fan, Brian, I have a difficult time on game day with mental errors, especially illegal procedure and offsides. By my mind, that's just a lack of focus. Your thoughts, go Irish. Sometimes it is. I don't think it's always that case. I mean, look, there are things that – so you all know I was a big John Elway fan. Well, John Elway was the best I've ever seen at drawing people off sides and getting free plays. And so it's like when I played, we're under center a lot more. That was something that I put emphasis on. It wasn't that other teams weren't focused. It was just that's part of the manipulation. It's like what you'll see teams like Bama used to do and Georgia does a lot now is like right before the snap, they'll shift their D-line. Like everybody shifts over a gap. And sometimes that'll cause linemen to jump. That's a mistake. It's a mental mistake. But I don't think that's a lack of focus. That's just the other team did something that was kind of good to kind of get you to jump. And you want to be more disciplined than that, but I don't think it's necessarily a mental mistake. Sometimes it is. When I get frustrated by false starts and jumping offside is when it was just done because you weren't focused. I mean, there is a time when it's not focused. So, you think the count's on 2 or 1, and instead it's on 2, or, you think it's on a clap, and it's really not, it's on the center, and you hear the quarterback clap and you jump and you're the only one that jumps, that's on you. That's a mental mistake, and I don't have a lot of patience for that. There are times, however, when I understand it, where, and sometimes you got to understand too, is not every false start is the fault of the guy that false started. There's times where like, hey, we're going on this cadence, and the quarterback messes up. That's happened in recent seasons. The quarterback will say, hey, we're doing this, and quarterback forgets what it was, or the center forgets the snap count, and then a couple of guys will jump. Because also, when you think, when you're an offensive tackle, so like if I'm a guard, I'm right here, the ball's right there. If I'm a tackle and I'm in a pass situation, the ball's over there, I'm actually kind of turned a little bit. You'll see them like their back foot a little bit, and you're almost like turned a little bit. It's a little harder to see the ball. You got to trust that the cadence that was provided, or the snap count that was provided, is what you're gonna go with. And so that's that's very interesting. I mean, that to me is it's an interesting take, and I just would say, I think sometimes we look at false starts and say, well, that was on that play. Like Liam Meichenberg had too many false starts in 2019, but if you knew the circumstance of all those situations, you'd know at least half of those were not his fault. They were, the center got the snap count wrong. The quarterback made a mistake. It was supposed to be something else, because you'll also see that there are several times where him and Robert Hainsey are both false starting. And that's not like a focus. That was because somebody else made a mistake. Lauren Hamilton, good observation. Could we see Pac-12 recruiting explode now with companies like YouTube, Google, Nike, et cetera, all located in the West and many ran by Pac-12 alum? I mean, certainly possible, especially with West Coast kids. There's no question that could be something that could certainly impacted it, and I think they needed to. I mean, I think the Pac-12 being better is good for college football. I don't think 1 or 2 leagues or 1 or 2 teams dominating is good for college football. I don't think Ohio State being the only great team in the Pac-12 or Big Ten is good for football. I don't think the Pac-12 being a joke and the ACC being Clemson and nobody is good for college football. I think the Pac-12 being good for college football is being better is good for college football, because now Oregon's going to beat Bama for a kid or two, or Florida for a kid or two, or USC is going to beat Texas for a kid or two and beat Oklahoma for a kid or two, or beat Ohio State for a kid or two. And I think that's where parity starts, is these programs building up, as opposed to just let's tear Bama down because they're too good, or that's not their fault that they're doing a great job, or let's how about we do things to make sure that other teams are being held accountable to build yourselves up. And to me, that's the American way right there. If you don't like them dominating you, then do something about it, And I think, Lauren, this could help them. And I think it's coming at the right time. They're getting new leadership. They've got a new Pac-12 conference president, which is going to help, because I think Larry Scott was utterly useless. But there's so many other issues beyond just that hurt the Pac-12, Lauren, that they're going to have to work through some of those things. But if they can work through some of those things, like the TV deal, the Pac-12 network, which is a hot mess, there's some other things going on in those states politically that are going to make it a little bit challenging in the moment, but eventually those things are going to be in the rear view, and they won't be stumbling blocks for those institutions. So I think it's certainly something that could, but at the end of the day, what y'all have to understand is, and I know you all know this, I know you know this, Lauren, but kids want to win too, right? And okay, maybe I could make $500,000 or something like that going to Oregon, to USC or to UCLA or Oregon State or something like that, and stink and get my butt kicked every day and maybe not play for the best program. Or I could make $300,000 and maybe not get drafted. I can make $300,000 at Notre Dame or Ohio State or Florida or Georgia or something, and play in a winning program, be part of a championship team, get drafted higher, those kind of things. Those things are smart. Kids are gonna look at the bigger picture on this part. KC Badger, it's a really good comment right here, KC. Brian, it's great we have Buckner and have a chance at Dante Moore. My concern is BK has yet to develop a quarterback. Their freshman season, they play well, then it goes downhill. What's the issue in your opinion? I agree with you completely. I think there's a couple issues here. Number one, I think that the longer these kids stay on campus, they put way more on them than they should. And, for example, I think Tommy Rees is a really smart football guy. I think Chip Long was a really smart football guy. One of my issues that I had with Coach Long, and it's one of the issues I had with Coach Rees at times last year, and it's one of the concerns I have anytime Notre Dame's going to have a veteran quarterback, which they're going to have this year, is say, well, hey, this guy's a veteran, so we can do a lot more things. And I don't think that's necessarily the answer. And, Coach Long would talk about, the amount of offense they bring into a game. And Coach Rees actually made a comment about this in the spring, where he talked about how they practice all these things. And a lot of times, a lot of the stuff they didn't run in the game. Well, that's not making good use of your practice time. And he was saying it in that vein. He was saying, like, look, I mean, is this really the best use of our practice time when we're practicing all these plays and we don't run a lot of them? We need to focus on the things we're running. I hope he sticks with that. But I think Brian Kelly's tendency throughout his tenure is, hey, now they're more experienced. Let's throw all this more stuff on them, and let's run all this complex stuff and all these really complex schemes and this NFL stuff. And so, now it's like, so these young guys can't play. And then when you get in these situations like in 2016, where they played a lot of young guys, right? And one of the responses that some of the homerish type of people will make is, well, look at 2016 and they had all these freshmen and sophomores playing. Yeah, and they stunk. They didn't stink because they had a bunch of freshmen and sophomores playing, but because they don't have a system and a philosophy on offense that predicates on being successful with young players, is, yeah, they put up some numbers, but they made a ton of mistakes because they don't coach in a way that is conducive, in my opinion, to college players. And if you don't have a bunch of veterans that have been through the wars and the battles and have this deeper understanding of the system, then you're not going to be as successful. And that's what we saw. And you even look at the years where there were freshman quarterbacks or redshirt freshman quarterbacks, those guys were usually surrounded by veteran players. And I think that helped them as well. But then those guys get older and more is put on their chest. And then you see Brian Kelly starts being more involved with them as they get older, as opposed to just letting the quarterback coach and the OC handle it. I think sometimes also there's too many voices involved as well. So Nolan Esparza, the NCAA is a joke. They couldn't care less about student athletes. They would trade any of them for a $20 bill. You're not wrong. You are not wrong. See, Jeff Nanka says, I'd put up Notre Dame's 40-year-old non-Notre Dame, non-NFL alumni against anyone in the country as far as being successful husbands, fathers, and businessmen. And I think that's one of the unique things about Notre Dame. And even Notre Dame's not perfect, but I do believe Notre Dame still puts value on building young people holistically. And again, they make mistakes. They're not perfect by any stretch of imagination, but that is something, you have to room with non-athletes sometimes. You have to take real classes. You have to go to class. You have to be accountable. I remember Stephon Tuitt. Remember, he got suspended for the Purdue game because he skipped the class. I mean, this is a big-time future high draft pick and all that kind of stuff. We've seen that before. You had a starting quarterback got suspended for a year because he cheated on a test. Do you think that a starting quarterback at some of these schools that are consistently winning championships would have suspended a guy for a year for cheating on a test? I'm not saying Notre Dame was wrong. I actually think I believe creating accountability is a good thing. I believe setting a standard and then holding people to that standard, as long as you're holding yourself as the adult to that same standard, is good for young people. Because as I said to my players when I coach, and I wish that every coach had this view, and I learned this from coaches that I looked up to. This is something I created. This is something that I saw them do in the standard that they held. And I was like, yeah, that's the standard I wanted to be held to as a player. And that's how I'm going to hold my players as a coach was, yes, it's important that you be a good football player. Yes, it's important that we win. Otherwise, I don't have a job. But at the end of the day, if we go out and win a championship this year and we come back in 20 years for our 20-year reunion, I'm not going to want to talk football with you. We'll share some stories and things like that. But what's really going to matter to me is, what kind of husband are you? What kind of father are you if you're fortunate enough to have children? What kind of employee are you? Or what kind of employer are you? What kind of impact are you having on your society? Because here's the deal. Your kids aren't going to really, why did you grow up to be a successful kid? Well, my dad was a great football player at Notre Dame. That's why I'm successful. No, my dad may have been a great football player at Notre Dame, but my dad was a great dad. He was there. He was around. He taught me discipline. He showed me love. He showed me compassion. He showed me discipline when it was needed. He created a sense of accountability. He gave me support, and support sometimes is a kick in the pants, and those are the things that I care more about than, yeah, you were a great receiver, but you're not living your life in a way that you're lifting up the people around you and building up the people around you. And I care more about that. And unfortunately, there's just not enough people that do, in my opinion. Tom A says, again, might be early, but are few offensive coaches on hot seat for recruiting and player development for 2022 and 2023. I don't think they are, but I think they should be. And that's about all I can say about that. And hopefully I'm wrong on the first part, that I don't think that they are. Let's see. All right, Ty B says, totally against the 12-team playoff. I agree. Your playoff version that you explained is the best for a real college football fan. Will they extend how many scholarship athletes you can have when they make the playoff change? That's an interesting point, and it's something I've thought about writing about, is how are you going to change the scholarship numbers now that you're putting greater demands on players from a number of games standpoint? I don't know if that's going to happen, but I mean, and I think the other thing too is, there's some changes I like to see. So one thing I've thought about saying is, okay, if we're going to reward players for graduating, allowing them to be the one-time transfer. Well, we've kind of gotten rid of that reward. So what are some ways that we can still do that? Okay, well, if you take a graduate transfer, even if he has multiple years of eligibility left, his scholarship does not count towards your 85. And you can take up to 5 a year that don't count towards your 85. Then there might be incentive to take more graduates, which then creates a situation where more kids are going to say, hey, look, I'm a sophomore. I'm going to stick it out one more year, and then I'm going to go. I'm going to do this. I think that would be something that you could see them do, to where that would help the game better. It would make the transfer situation better, which doesn't address your question, but I'm going to tie it back in here now. Now, all of a sudden, if you expand your roster in that fashion, then now you have a little bit of a deeper roster as you get into these situations where teams are having to play 15, 16, and sometimes 17 games in order to win a championship. I appreciate this, Clayton. Clayton says, totally agree at Chris Ayers. We're all on this channel and follow Brian because we have a thirst for real knowledge with zero spin. Makes for a more educated fan base, and it's epic. And that's exactly what I want us to be. Absolutely what I want us to be. Thank you for that, Bert. No question about it. Brady Urista says, do you think Notre Dame goes after a wide receiver in the portal? If so, who? I don't know of anybody right now that they are going after, Brady. I will say this, I'll be honest. When I saw that Jake Smith from Texas was in the portal, I thought, boy, I hope they're at least kicking the tires on that to see what his health is. I know he's been banged up a little bit at Texas, but man, I love that kid coming out of high school. So yeah, it's that to me is one of those ones because he has multiple years of eligibility left that I'd be interested in. I don't have any use for a receiver that's going to come in and be here for a year. If a guy could maybe be here for a couple years or 2 to 3 years, then I'd be more willing to take a transfer at this point in time. But I don't know of anyone specifically that I would look at. Let's see here. Caleb Collins says, just in case my question got kicked, I live in Vegas and I'm taking 400 down to the sports book to make future bets. I need your top 4 that's not Bama or Clemson to win it all. Oh, my goodness. You're putting that pressure on me? Okay. So I take no responsibility if this does not work out. This is on you, but you simply asked me who my top 4 are to win it all, not named Bama or Clemson. I actually believe, I've said this before, I believe that Notre Dame, if they make the changes that they need to make, is a dark horse title contender this season. I think this could be Oklahoma's best chance to compete for a title because I don't think Oklahoma is going to be as dynamic offensively as they've been. But you've got Spencer Rattler going into year 2. You've got a lot of starters coming back on your O-line. You've got Marvin Mims. You have a very talented receiving core. You get Kennedy Brooks back. He was a 1,000-yard rusher who sat out last year because of, he was a COVID sit out. And you're getting Eric Gray, who's a transfer from Tennessee, I believe. Your schedule's favorable. It's a good schedule, but not a brutal schedule. But defensively, they've got more high-end defensive talent than they've had in a while. And I think Alex Grinch has finally got them sort of where he wants them to be. And I think he's a good football coach. So I think Oklahoma's a dark horse for me. I actually wouldn't have Clemson in my top 2. I kind of wrote about this in Midweek Musings the other day. And, look, I'm George is a team that I would never put money on because I don't trust Kirby Smart as a coach. But they finally have a big-time quarterback, and they've got talent, and they've got an offensive coordinator I like. I just don't know if Kirby Smart's going to turn them loose. Those are the only programs right now, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Georgia, that I look at and think Ohio State is the other one that I look at and say, boy, they've got a shot to win a title, as far as to win it all. I think that's my 6 that I would look at. I don't see Iowa State as that team. There's no Pac-12 team that I think is good enough to win it all. There's no Texas A&M isn't that team, in my opinion, at all. I think they're overhyped a little bit. North Carolina's not. Cincinnati's not. Again, to win it all, I think it's Bama, it's Clemson, it's Oklahoma, it's Notre Dame, it's Georgia, and it's Ohio State. I mean, that's it to me. Let's see here. Chris Ayers. Chris, I think I might have misspelled or missed this question. I think your question got booted, so I'm not quite sure what you're talking about. But if this is a response to something I said, but what I posted on another show that won't be mentioned about Penn State should not be beating Notre Dame for top offensive recruits. Penn State's going to get their share of wins here and there, but they shouldn't be dominating Notre Dame on offense the way that they are, especially coming off of a 4-5 season. That shouldn't be happening. All righty. No shots at each other. That's not gonna let that happen in this chat. All right. We can debate, we can argue, but be respectful. We're all adults here. Okay. Okay, Michael Moore says, Brian, I've learned more about how to look at recruits' film in the last year from this show than the last 20 from all the recruiting services. I don't care about the stars, just the film. I love it. I love hearing that. Absolutely. All right, absolutely. Chris Ayers, I think great minds think alike here, Chris. Ohio State, Georgia, and Notre Dame are worth taking on a shot on your Final Four. I really would add Oklahoma to that. I'm actually higher on Oklahoma this year than I normally am. Because I actually think they don't have a great defense. It's not that. It's just they have a defense I think is good enough to make enough stops to where they can outscore people. Yeah. That's kind of how I feel about that one. Nolan Esparza says, there was a poster yesterday that said that Freeman has set a new bar for Notre Dame recruiting. I completely agree, and it's becoming painfully obvious the offensive coaches are falling well short. I agree with that. I don't think he set a new bar, and this is what I actually love about Marcus Freeman. I don't think he set a new bar because I think a new bar makes it seem like it wasn't something that was capable of, and this is more of a semantic difference, Nolan. I think your point stands correctly, but I'm just saying like the way that I look at it, I don't disagree with yours. This is the way I look at it is I think it's more about he's going back to he understands, or at least is showing that he understands more than people that have been at Notre Dame for a long time, that this is Notre Dame. There's a standard that this program used to be held to that we're going to be held to again, and we're going to hold ourselves to again. And to me, that's the thing for me. That's the part that I really like and respect about him, and I think that's gonna help out a ton, in my opinion. Nolan also asked, is there one offensive coach that is pulling his weight in recruiting this year? Again, I mean, he's got to close, but I do think Tommy Rees is putting in a lot of work this year. There's no question about it. And even though he got off to a bit of a rocky start, I think John McNulty ended up bringing in a really good 1-2 punch there. No question about it. Get some more questions here. Glenn Charles, my favorite channel on YouTube. This is what I've been missing for years. Great way to be straightforward and honest. Irish love. Thank you very much for that, Glenn. Very, very much. Seth Coleman, when it comes to Wisconsin guys that Notre Dame fell behind on, mainly Stroud, I agree that Notre Dame is O-line U, but did that pitch possibly not register as well? Wisconsin O-line tradition isn't far behind. Notre Dame doesn't necessarily pitch O-line U in their recruiting. It's about here's the scheme, here's the development, here's the things we're going to do. That's what's not working. And that's not what's hitting home. It's not so much about where O-line U in Wisconsin isn't. That isn't the pitch. And if that was the pitch, that would be terrible. What I'm simply saying, Seth, is this is O-line U. You should be able to go into the state of Wisconsin and say, yes, Wisconsin has a good O-line tradition. I've made this point on this very show in the last couple of weeks that Wisconsin has put a lot of kids in the NFL on the offensive line, not to the high degree that Notre Dame has, but it has a good tradition at offensive line, which is why I'm not expecting them to get 3 of 3, and I'm not even expecting them to get 2 of 3, although they were at that point at one point in time. But Notre Dame can go to Ohio and get Brennan Vernon, a school that has far more success developing defensive linemen than Wisconsin has developing offensive linemen. They go to Florida and beat, Florida State, Miami for Keon Keeley. Miami just put 2 defensive ends in the first round of the NFL draft, yet we can't expect Notre Dame to get a single one guy from Wisconsin on offense. That's problematic. So, I mean, what you're saying isn't true about Wisconsin's tradition, but again, this is Notre Dame. Do you honestly think that if Harry Hiestand was still at Notre Dame, or if the O-line coach at Oklahoma was at Notre Dame, or some of the top O-line coaches in the country were at Notre Dame, if Joe Gilbert was hired instead of Jeff Quinn, do you honestly think that they would have struck out completely for those offensive linemen? Do you think they would have struck out completely with guys like the kid that's at Skoronsky, right, at Northwestern, Wyatt Milam at West Virginia, Penn State getting Wisconsin getting Nolan Ziegler. I mean, Jimmy Crisp going to Virginia and then Penn State. I mean, this isn't a new thing. This isn't just unique to Wisconsin. And that's the other thing is all the context matters. If they were killing it in offensive line recruiting and they just lost to Wisconsin, you say, hey, look, it's Wisconsin. But this is a problem that goes well beyond just not beating Wisconsin for kids. This goes much deeper than that, in my opinion. DC says, in your opinion, Brian, why is Notre Dame missing out on top targets? I don't think that. I think it's a little too broad of a comment, DC. I think that they're missing on their top targets at some positions, but they're going to literally hit their top target at every at linebacker. I would say that they literally are going to get the 4 linebackers they wanted in this class, no question. And because if they wanted different guys, they could have them. If they thought Sebastian Cheeks was a better play than Nolan Ziegler, they would have done with Nolan Ziegler what they did at tight end with Jack Nickel. Hey, look, Nolan, we love you. We like you here, but we're just going to recruit 5 guys and the reality is you're going to have a tough time getting on the field. They could have done that, and Sebastian Cheeks would be in the class right now. They'd have 3 linebackers. Nolan Ziegler would have decommitted and gone somewhere else, and they would have had Sebastian Cheeks committed. And then when Jalen Sneed, when Jalen Sneed makes his decision, if it is Notre Dame, then they have their 4. But that's not the decision they made. They said, no, we want Nolan Ziegler in the class. Marcus Freeman, when he got hired, could have said, look, Nolan, I like you, but there's other guys on the board that we like better. He recruited him when he was at Cincinnati. He knows exactly what this kid can do. He's had multiple opportunities, if he so chooses, to say to Nolan, we like you, but you don't really fit, and there's other guys we like. It's never been the case. It's been everything from that side of things with him has been, yeah, you're a dude that we want. No question about it. And that's why they've made some of the decisions they made at linebacker. So they certainly hit all the marks there. Defensive end, I mean, I don't know if you're going to find a better defensive end class in the country than the trio that they have. Tight end, they ended up getting their top 2 guys. So, I mean, there's been some positions they've gotten their top guys. It's just, there's a couple positions on offense where they're not doing that. Kenny Moore says offensive recruiting has simply not been the same since Chip Long was let go. I agree with you, and if people are being honest with themselves, they would see that. I really think they did. John DeCristio says, why did Tony Alford leave Notre Dame? Was it just money or something else? It was something else. It wasn't about money. Tony Alford loved it at Notre Dame. It was time for a change for him. Coach Koch, hey, Coach, best show around, period. Thank you. It's important to stay on your commitments. Are there any potential kids the staff could target that are already committed elsewhere to swing them? Coach, for me, it's about I got to see them. I got to see who they close with, right? So if they miss out on Tobias Merriweather and C.J. Williams, let's just say hypothetically, both of those kids say, you know what, I love Notre Dame, but I really want to take visits. And I don't mean silently commit and then just wait till January or December. I mean, like, actually say, hey, look, I love you guys, but I really want to see what else is out there. This was too rushed or whatever the case may be. Then, you gotta start making some decisions and look around and say, okay, well, what are we going to do? And then at that point in time, it's like, okay, but then who are the guys that you're going to try to flip? So maybe they go to a Joseph Griffin and try to flip him from Boston College. Maybe you try to, if Michigan has a down year, and Tyler Morris is healthy, maybe you try to flip him. If Penn State struggles again, maybe you can go and try to flip Caden Saunders because, right now that's not happening, but, maybe they struggle again. So there are some guys out there that they could turn to, but the reality is I don't think if they can't land these guys at receiver, for example, I don't think they're going to be able to go flip somebody that's committed somewhere else. I think there's a deeper problem there. I think in the secondary, maybe there's a better chance to do that. Maybe there's a chance in the secondary that you look at some of these safeties that are committed to other places that you look at and say, let's say Ohio State does get to 6 commitments. Maybe you can go to Kai Stokes and be like, hey, man, they just signed 2 safeties. They got you, come take a peek at us. I mean, that's certainly possible. But right now, honestly, Coach, the focus is on the kids that are currently uncommitted that they want to still get. There's guys on their board that if they can close the way that they need to and should, they don't need to go anywhere else. They've got the guys there. I think the only position you may say that is offensive line. But again, who would that guy be? Who would be the guy that you think would be capable of flipping? You could say, George Fitzpatrick is a guy that maybe the staff should have been more high on. They, for whatever reason, didn't prioritize him. He's looking at big time. He's looking at Ohio State, Oregon. I don't know if you're going to be able to flip him from there. A guy that I would try to flip, though, on the offensive line is if you strike out on the offensive line, barring there being some injury I don't know about or some academic situation I don't know about, I would absolutely go after Jacob Allen from New Jersey, who's currently committed to Rutgers. That's a kid I like quite a bit. Quite a bit. Christopher Sally says, does John McNulty ever help in recruiting their other positions at Notre Dame after Notre Dame is set at tight end in the current class? I'm sure he has some role, but it's not going to be a needle-moving role. At this point in time, Christopher, it's not going to be a situation where, hey, you weren't going to get Tobias Merriweather, but John McNulty stepped in and because he's not their position coach. So, does he have a role like when they're doing on-campus visits? Is there a role maybe for him to be a part of in-home visits or to make some phone calls and things like that? Sure, but it's not going to necessarily be a needle-moving type of role. It's going to have to be about, it's going to have to be about the position coaches and the coordinators being able to get that job done. That, to me, that's what it's going to be about. And I know, like, I've had, maybe Mike Elston can step up and help, and maybe Marcus Freeman can help. And, like, look, that's fine, and that sounds great, but that's not going to work. The kid's going to have that connection and that trust in the coaches that are going to actually coach him. And if it's not there, you're going to have a hard time. You're going to have a hard time winning. Coach Koch says, as far as receiver recruiting, it's hard to get excited about commitments when I don't think they will play early or get developed well enough to make an impact. That's a fair concern. Hopefully that changes over the next couple of years. But yeah, I mean, as of right now, that's a fair concern. Old Grim, who or how many coaches are dropping the ball on offense, and what can be done about it? I don't know if I'd say dropping the ball yet. Let's let it play out. I think that the receiver class could end up still being pretty good, and we could have some nitpicks with it because of who they didn't target. But let's see. I mean, if they get to Bias Merriweather and CJ Williams, I mean, that's a quality group right there. I don't think Lance Taylor's dropping the ball. Is he recruiting as well as the running back coach at Notre Dame should be recruiting? No. Is dropping the ball? No. I think it's really comes down to really one position. And again, the excuses are going to be, well, look, you got Blake Fisher, you got Rocco Spindler, and that's all true, but that's what you're supposed to do at Notre Dame. But when you're also at Notre Dame, your 3, your 4, and your 5 should be better quality than we've seen in recent years, including 2 years ago when they got 0 people past number 2, which is a problem. Let's see here. Coach Koch says, I am with you on Cone. I think he's going to do well. Notre Dame quarterback's record history shows that they regress, not progress. True. Since Cone is already developed, that may not be a factor. It's a very good point. Tyler says, Brian, I know you love Dante Moore. Any word on his unofficial? Does Notre Dame have him top of the board like you? I don't know if he's their number 1 top of the board guy. I have gotten an impression that he is. Let's say this. I can't say for sure that he is the top of the board guy. I am confident in saying, however, based on what I've gathered, that he is certainly a top of the board guy. And it wouldn't shock me based on some things I've been told if he is their top guy. I'm simply saying I can't say yes because I have not been told that he is. Me reading between the lines of some things I have been told would say, if I had to guess, I would say yes, he is their top quarterback target. But I'd be lying to you if I said, oh, yes, he's their top of the board target, board target. But I think he is. I don't know that for a fact. Let's see here. Brian, transfer portal is still active with athletes putting their names in it. If those players do not get any interest from schools before the opening season week, what are the players' options? I mean, they can still transfer. They just wouldn't be eligible to play this year, I believe. And again, I'm still trying to get clarification on that. I know that some of the dates have moved because of COVID and other things. There's so much uncertainty. And again, the thing is, the NCAA has not exactly laid out a clear plan for what this exactly means. Tim Hatch, does there seem to be specific position or position groups that Notre Dame continually finds hard to find high talent recruits that are academic compatible with Notre Dame? See, this is kind of my thing, Tim. I don't buy that. And I understand where you're coming from. This is not a comment on you, but I think that's the spin that some make. Oh, they can't do this. And here's my thing. I wrote an article today at irishbreakdown.com. I would encourage you all to read it. And I led with the thought of there was a long time where Notre Dame fans said, Notre Dame there's just not enough, if you look at around the country and the top edge rushers, they're from parts of the country where, I don't know if academics are really the most important thing to them, which I find absurd because just because of where someone's from or what they look like, you don't know if they care about academics or not. It was more of you didn't have the kind of program that was attractive to them. And you didn't maybe work hard enough, or you didn't do this, you didn't do that. And, you'd have the great year in 2011 with Aaron Lynch and Ishaq Williams and Stephon Tuitt. And then the next few years, it's like, okay, now what are you doing? It just was such a hit or miss thing. But you look at what Notre Dame has done in recent years, and all of a sudden defensive end recruiting, which, you can't get elite edge athletes on the edge. You can only get big power guys, right? That was the excuse in the Bob Davie era, the excuse in the Ty era, the excuse in the Charlie era, and for a lot of the Brian Kelly era. Well, now all of a sudden, you get Isaiah Foskey in one class. The next year, you get Jordan Patojo and Nana Osafo-Mensah, California, Hawaii, Texas, big time football areas. 2021, not so great from a high upside guys on the outside. High floor guys on the outside, but you got some high ceiling guys. But then you get Gabriel Rubio at 3 technique, big time player. In 2019 or 2020, also got Riley Mills, who's a big-time player. And then 2022 comes around, and I'll take Tyson Ford, who's from St. Louis. Aiden Gabbera, who's from Virginia. Got Darren Nagu, who's playing in Georgia. He's from overseas. I mean, you got 3 top-of-the-board, high elite upside players. And then you go to 2023, and you get Keon Keeley and Brendan Vernon. So now all of a sudden defensive end isn't an issue anymore before. So I have to ask you, Tim, is it a situation where just miraculously in the last 4 recruiting classes, there's just all of a sudden these really athletic players that want to go to class than there was before? Oh, and this was used at running back. So all of a sudden around 2016 till about 2019, Notre Dame was struggling to recruit running back. And the excuse people literally would make was, well, top running backs just don't want to go to class. Well, before that, they had no problem finding those guys. And since then, even though Lance Taylor has not done the job he's capable of, he's still done a pretty good job. And then with Chip Long, he did a really good job. Get Chris Tyree, get the kids they got. So now all of a sudden, miraculously, there's running backs that look like Notre Dame. Cornerback's another example. Kamari Rogers academically has no problem with Notre Dame. It's really came down to, what's the reason I should go there? Who's the type draft picks that you've produced in the last 20 years? There isn't one. I think it comes down to that. It's if you give these kids a reason to come, there's plenty of kids out there. If Notre Dame was coming off a 4-8 year, the year that Kyle Hamilton was coming out of high school, do you think Kyle Hamilton would have gone to Notre Dame no matter what? I don't believe that he would have. But Notre Dame was having more success, and that helped them get Kyle Hamilton. And that's true at receiver. It's true at running back. It's true at corner, defensive end, defensive tackle, linebacker, and safety. You have to have the right coach that can put in the recruiting work. You have to have a good strategy. You have to have a holistic strategy that includes really reaching out to everything that's important to that young man, but also having holistically on your end and making sure that your head coach, your coordinators, your position coaches, your support staff, everybody's on the same page to say, we're going to go get that kid. And then you got to give them a reason to come. And on the field, Notre Dame is giving more kids a reason to come, and all of a sudden, they're having success. Notre Dame struggled to recruit linebackers for 2-3 years. Is that because there just weren't linebackers that cared about academics, or was it because they didn't have someone like Marcus Freeman doing the work? And that's kind of where I come from. So that's my soapbox thing on that one. Wade Garrett says, seems like Lance has missed out on RBs lately. That seemed like he would land at Notre Dame. Any explanation? Is it him or entire staff to blame, or not a big deal? I think it's a little bit of both. It's not a huge deal because they've ended up still getting good backs, but the backfield has a chance to be good moving forward. It could be even better and should be even better. And to me, it's not a fireable offense kind of thing, but it is worth looking into, saying, hey, what happened here? Why did we lose all 3 of those kids? Why couldn't we get one of them? And figuring out, okay, here's what we did wrong. Okay, let's not do that anymore. And let's make sure we do a better job there. Let's see some more questions. Searcher Green, cheating on a test is missing half a game at Bama actually happened. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I know for a fact there's kids that just don't go to class at Bama, or at least as of recent seasons. I know people that have worked there, and they'll say, yeah, I never saw this kid. I saw this kid the first day of class and the last day of class, and that was it. And it's just, you knew that this is what you got to do, because, if it comes down to the football player or the teacher, the football player's going to win that battle. Christopher Sally, this is good. My daughter was in an economics class with Chris Tyree this past summer and said he never missed a class because Chris Tyree, like there are other players like him, came to Notre Dame not just for football, because he understands there's more to life than just being fast and running football. There's a lot of kids out there like that. There really are. And thanks for sharing that, Christopher. Joseph Salvatore says, thanks for the show, Brian. Since it's looking like we're losing out on Singleton, will Notre Dame go after remaining backs? I think I answered that one already, Joseph. So, yeah. Kevin Thomas, can Xavion Bradshaw play running back? Hey, if that's what it takes to get him here, Kevin, I'm all in. Brian Meadows says maybe they can flip Nicholas Singleton before it's all over. I would certainly try. Absolutely would try. Robert Butcher says the university must assist their families in obtaining legal representation with competent attorneys who put their clients' interest first. Attorneys or marketing agents. I mean, just there's all types of things that I think schools need to be able to better facilitate, and you got to let the kids make informed decisions. But the school should be able to kind of help guide that decision, and you should have to go through certain entities. You shouldn't be able to just go directly to the kid. Go directly to the parent, that's fine. But then there need to be resources like Robert's talking about. There need to be resources provided by the schools, by the NCAA to say, hey, families, we're here to help. Not every family, not every young person comes from a family that has, academic professors or college graduates. My parents didn't go to college, right? I mean, there's things they could have helped with, but there's a lot of things that we didn't know. I mean, I look back at when I was going through the recruiting process, and my dad and I have talked about this before. Like, if I'd have known then what we know now, I would have handled my recruitment way different. But my dad didn't go to college. He didn't play college sports. We didn't know the questions to ask, right? In this same situations, we wouldn't have known this. We wouldn't have known that. Some guy comes and tells us, hey, I can make you $5,000 and all that kind of stuff. And you find out down the road, he was taking $25,000. I was actually making 30, but he was keeping 25 up and was only giving me 5. We wouldn't have been prepared to handle that, right? There needs to be a system in place to give resources to the families to make sure that not only are they maximizing their opportunities to make money, but it's also protecting them from people that are going to look to take advantage. Jason Rose says 12-team playoff is stupid. Takes all the importance of regular season games and rivalries out of college football. Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson are still better. And look, 12-team playoff, we're still going to finish for the most part with the same 4 teams. It's going to be different 4 teams, but look, college football has always been like this. It was periods where it was Notre Dame and Miami, and then Alabama had some runs, and then Ohio State had some runs, and LSU's had some runs, but it's always been sort of a smaller group of teams. It's not like all of a sudden Boise State's going to go win a national title or play in the playoff or get to the semifinal. It's just not how it's going to be. Michael Morris says, I believe in my heart that if Tommy Rees can have a great year at OC, we will start winning our fair share of top recruits. I agree. And I think that's the one thing that hurts Tommy Rees. He's putting in work. He's got a good personality and all that kind of stuff. But what's the resume he's using to promote himself? What's this proven success that he has? That's not a knock on him. He's doing it for 1 year. I mean, there's no supplement for that. But next year, when he's got, let's say they do put 40 points per game on the board, that's a situation where now all of a sudden he's got that behind him. And let's say that, Michael Mayer's an All-American and they've got a couple more guys going to the NFL. Kyron Williams is a first-round draft pick in the NFL. Jack Cohn all of a sudden becomes a big-time quarterback that maybe finds a home in the NFL right after Ian Book did. You say, look, I turned a guy like Ian Book into an NFL quarterback. We turned Jack Cohn into an NFL quarterback. Imagine what we could do with you, Dante Moore. So, Michael, I think you're right on point there. No question about it. Brian Meadows, I think the offensive staff needs to sit down on the defensive side of the ball and take notes on how to recruit. It's not a bad idea. Not a bad idea. Doug says, 2024, we should win the Natty. We have been looking for. Buckner will be a veteran, and the defense will be incredible. Do you think Buckner will stay through the 2024 season? Doug, my man, I have no idea. I've seen the kid throw a grand total of 0 college passes, so I have no idea. If he's as good as I think he is, could he be gone by then? Yeah, just like a Trevor Lawrence, just like a Dustin Fields. But we're a long way from that. Let me see him throw a pass first. But I think the talent is there for her. Potentially, he could be gone by then. But and look, if they do what I hope they're going to do recruiting wise, if he leaves going to 2024, then hopefully he's being replaced by Dante Moore. That'd be the dream for me, Doug. And then I'd still feel pretty good about it. So I think you can win with a young quarterback, especially a second-year guy, and that's what the 2023 quarterback would be. You can certainly win with a 2023 guy if the system is in place and the supporting cast around him, defensively, offensive line, scheme, playmakers, and like those type of things, is worth it. Eugene McGovern, I've known Eugene a long time. Hey, Brian, that long rant about NIL and its ramifications, how we should treat these young student athletes is probably the best thing I've ever heard from you all these years. Bravo. And you've heard me go on a lot of rants over the years, Gene, so I appreciate that. Appreciate that very much. Seth Coleman, 100%. Get this up here. Here we go. Okay. 100% agree. If Heastan is here, we don't lose out, and that would be something I would have added, that losing him has hurt the O-line U status a little. I think it's hurt him a lot, in my opinion. All right. Nolan says, I don't think you could have said it better. Freeman knows how special Notre Dame is, and he is not selling for less than special like his predecessors. That's what I love, this chat, fans talking Notre Dame. Absolutely late. Absolutely Correct. Jesse Ferguson says, I'm a bit late to the show, so I apologize if I've already answered this, but what do you think Notre Dame's chances are of landing Singleton next Tuesday? Notre Dame looked to be in great shape only a few days ago. It's not looking good based on the latest information I've gotten. It does not look like it looks like he has – the fact that when kids set commitment dates like that, that's like 5 days away, it's not, okay, it's usually not, okay, I got 5 days to make my decision. It's usually like, okay, I've made my decision, and I'm going to announce it on this date. And the time between now and the 6th is going to be about him getting the video going and the whole production of what his commitment is going to be. It's usually not about, I have 5 days to decide. So it's not looking good for Notre Dame. Tristan Martz, you always say don't ask a kid to do something he isn't good at. With the 2D being up to 24 players, how do coaches possibly keep track of who can do what on the field? I mean, that's what practice is for. That's number one, Tristan. Part of that is your evaluation of a player, right? So when you bring a kid onto your campus as a recruit, you have an idea of what you think he can and can't do. I can look at film and say, man, I love Tyson Ford. He can do this, this, and this. You know what I'm pretty sure Tyson Ford can't do? Drop into coverage and cover a running back, right? So I'm not going to ask him to do that, okay? That's an extreme example, but you understand the point. So you have an idea. And then when you get to fall camp, especially with these early enrollees, you get them in practice and you see this kid, hey, look, this kid in drills, he's got a little bit more foot quickness or maybe a little bit more agility or lateral quickness than we thought he could do. So, let's put him in some of these situations. When I was a coach, a lot of programs I've been around, I've seen Notre Dame do this. One of the things they'll do in practice is they will get into situations where say, okay, let's put these kids in stressful situations, see how they handle it. Well, spring ball is a great time for that. Summer's a great time for that. So, hey, I'm not sure if this kid can play man coverage. So when we go to one-on-ones, I'm going to put this kid up against our top players because I want to see how he handles it, And then you find out like, yeah, oh boy, he really struggles flipping his hips. And then you can say, okay, is it because it's a technique issue? Does he have tight ankles? Does he have tight hips? Is he a guy that just doesn't have the flexibility or the agility to do that kind of thing? And you address it. You either coach it up if it's something he can get better at, or if you say, no, he's just not good at it, then you don't ask him to do that. So, for example, you look at a guy like Isaiah Pryor. There's film of Isaiah Pryor at Ohio State where he's struggling in coverage. There's film of it at Notre Dame where it's like, boy, that kid just doesn't flip his hips real effectively. So you learn over time in practice and scrimmages and things like that, boy, this guy really struggles in these situations. And you identify why he struggles in those things, and you decide it's either a skill problem and an instinct problem, and you don't put him in that situation, or you go do him. But look, a 2 deep is up to 24 players, right? But you're not only practicing with 24 players. You're going to have guys on scout team. You have individual drills. You're going to play more than those 24 guys when you go to like 7-on-7s in different parts of the practice. Plus, not every position only has a 2 deep. Some positions will have, tight end, you only have 2 tight ends listed, but you're going to have 3-4 tight ends up with your varsity offense. You only have 2 running guys on running back on defense, but you're always going to have a third running back up with your varsity, so to speak, on offense, getting work, getting reps. You're going to have an idea of what he can do. So I think all those things factor into how you can determine what a kid can or can't do. But at the end of the day, Tristan, you have to be able to, in some ways, be willing to give players an opportunity to play and to prove it. And sometimes, and I think this is an error that Notre Dame has had on offense, they have always put more emphasis on the practice players than the game players. I think that's especially true at quarterback. Carmine Burr, now that Coach Kelly is involved in recruiting, do you think he realizes certain positions on offense aren't pulling their weight, and will he do something about it? That is a great observation, Carmine, a great observation. I don't have an answer for you, but I am curious how that's going to be. So, let's just say that Coach Kelly and Coach Reese have to step up and get Billy Schrauth back in it. If Brian Kelly is the person and the coach and the leader that I think he is, he's going to sit down and have a conversation with Jeff Quinn and Tommy Reese and figure out, why are we here? And hopefully Tommy Reese and Mike Elson and the other recruiting operation people are honest with him and say, hey, here's what happened. Here's the deal. Hey, this is becoming a bit of a problem. And he's going to have to say, hey, look, this is the problem. If he has to get involved and help close the deal with maybe Tobias and CJ Williams or guys like that, say, hey, look, why are we missing on this guy or that guy? And so, yeah, I think it's a good thing. And here's the other thing too, Carmine, is it's not even necessarily about that. But when the head coach is involved now, that he's going to be checking your phone records to make, if he's going to reach out to the kid, he's checking to see how much you've talked to him. You can do one of two things. One is you can fake your phone records, which usually are going to get found out. Or two, you say, hey, you know what? I better step up my game. And I've talked to sources of people that have worked for Ohio State over the years and at Florida under Urban Meyer, and they will say a big part of the reason why, even though I don't love recruiting, why I recruited hard and was good at it is because I knew if I didn't, Urban was going to know and I was going to be done, because that's something he was very involved in. So I think it's a great thing for Coach Kelly to be involved in, and that's a good observation. How is he going to handle the position he has to really step up and help them close on? Is he going to follow through and say, why am I the one having to get this done? It's a very, very good observation. All right. Liam O'Malley says, Brian, I've been watching the show for a while now. Love the show, but I can't stand for this Clemson slander. My parents went to Notre Dame, but I go to Clemson. I honestly think Clemson is the team to beat. I get where you're coming from, Liam, but allow me to make my case, okay? And I wrote about this in an article yesterday. Number one, I'm not saying Clemson's going to stink. I'm not saying Clemson's going to go 9-3 this year. What I am saying, however, is we've seen Clemson slowly decline the last couple years. We have. If you go back to 2018, that was the best version of Clemson we've seen. Great D-line, really good linebackers, excellent corners, a very veteran offensive line. Not the most talented offensive line, but very veteran offensive line. Travis Etienne at running back, Trevor Lawrence at quarterback. Great wide receiver tandem, not just with Justin Ross and T. Higgins, but you had Hunter Renfrow, you had Amari Rodgers. That team was absolutely loaded. You also had Tony Elliott and Jeff Scott still on the staff on offense, and of course, Brent Venables running the defense. Fast forward to 2019, right? Clemson's still a great team. Clemson still goes and plays for the national championship, but you started to see some of the holes in Clemson even then. And, you look at kind of the regular season. They struggle to beat North Carolina, right? And then they kind of beat up on the rest of their schedule. They get to the postseason. And if it's not for Trevor Lawrence putting that team on their back and Ohio State making some dumb, boneheaded mistakes while up 16-0, mainly being settling for a bunch of field goals, Clemson loses that game. But because they had the best player in college football, he put them on his shoulders and he led them to a victory. And then even then, Ohio State has a chance to win at the end. Justin Fields throws a pick in the end zone, right? And then they go to the title game and they get completely outclassed by LSU. And you come into 2020. Good year, but, not a dominant year. And you look at what happened when they didn't have Trevor Lawrence. They barely beat Boston College, and they lose to Notre Dame. Now, again, freshman quarterback, not a huge deal, but you saw that offense, when it does not have a mobile quarterback, it does not have a running quarterback, it is not the same offense. It's just not. Say, well, they threw for a bunch of yards. It wasn't the same. It just wasn't. Then Trevor comes back. They smash Virginia Tech. They smash Notre Dame, right? Looks good, right? Then you get to the Ohio State game, and they get absolutely embarrassed. Why? Because nobody stepped up, and Trevor had a bit of an off game. And when Trevor had an off game, they got humiliated by Ohio State. That's how important he was. And now he's gone. Now, I expect the defense to be great. You got Miles Murphy's back as a sophomore. You got Brian Breezy. You got a really good linebacking core. The secondary is a little shaky. Andrew Booth still has a lot to prove to me. I like Joseph Christopher. You got Nolan Turner back, but that was not a great secondary last year. You lost Mike Jones. Should be fine. You got Trenton Simpson, some other young guys. I think the defense is going to be really good. But look at the offense. The running back depth chart's not the same. I like Lynn J. Dixon. He ain't Travis Etienne. Neither is Will Shipley. I look at the receivers. They got a lot of highly ranked guys, but they've got a lot of injuries. They haven't really played great when they're there. They lost Cornell Powell. They lost Amari Rodgers, who was a dynamic player for them in big games last year. And I just don't love the receiving core. It's just not what it used to be. And I don't think people realize just how much they needed the Herculean efforts of Deshaun Watson in 2016 and 15 and of Trevor Lawrence in 2019 and 20 to win the games they were winning. Now, do I expect them to stink this year? No. But I've seen some holes. And if you look at their recruiting, they're starting to there's some positions they're really strong, but there's some positions they've been struggling with a little bit recently. They've been coming up on short on numbers some years. So it's not slander. I'm just giving you my honest opinion that I think Clemson is slowly coming back down to earth. I did not say they're going to crash, so they're slowly coming back down to earth. And when you look at the last 3 playoff games they've played in, they were down 16-0 in one and came back because of Trevor Lawrence. And the last 2 playoff games they've been in, they've been blasted. I mean, blasted. And that to me, that's problematic. Yeah, see, this is Indy fans need to remember that the top recruits at each position are often ineligible to attend. No, they're not. That's not true. That's not true. That's false. I'll get to the next question here. I know that's the spin, Tim, and I'm not blaming you for this because I know that's been what even some of the Notre Dame coaches have been saying for years, but I'm telling you, that's not accurate. Are there kids that can't come to Notre Dame? Yes. Is it where every top player is not? That's false. That's false. Joe says, I wish we could find another Michael Floyd. I get that. Okay, Matthew, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to answer this. I'm going to try. Matthew Lass says, Brian, can you explain the ability for schools themselves to pay players for NIL? Unrelated, but I saw a college basketball player enter the portal, and some are saying he could be leveraging his value, and that school should pony up. Are players allowed to be paid directly by the school for NIL, or they can only seek endorsement opportunities to sell their own merch? My understanding is you're not getting paid by your school. It's my understanding. But again, that's kind of part of this whole thing, Matthew, is the NCAA is really not giving a lot of guidance on this. I believe this is from outside sources only. I think when it comes to leveraging his value, it has more to do with the combination of who I am and what is your pitch going to be? What are you going to do for me? So if I'm the school, okay, we want to get this kid, and this is what's going to make this recruiting game, especially in basketball, really brutal, is, hey, we got this deal for you. We've got that deal for you. We've got all these marketing deals for you. This is how much the package is going to be. It's basically just, you're buying players. That's what it is. You're buying players. It's just now you're doing it legally, and that's the difference. Sid Irish, Penn State went 4-5 last year. They are out recruiting Notre Dame, a team that has gone to the college football playoff 2 last 3 years. And they went 9-4 a couple years before that as well. Okay. Matthew Last then follows up, well, while that occurred in basketball, could we potentially see Notre Dame or other college football players threatening transfer as a bargaining chip for more NIL income? Yeah, I think we will see that. Not from a lot, not from all, but we'll see that. Carmine Burr, what are certain offensive coaches not doing that would make them better recruiters? I think, like with Coach Alexander, I think it's a failure to recruit the board, a lack of confidence himself. I don't think he's grinding the way he needs to. I think at times, I think he convinces himself that some players are better than they are because he knows he can get them. And if it wasn't for Tommy Rees getting involved, I don't know if Notre Dame would have been as hard on C.J. Williams as they were. When it was just the receivers coach, they were faded. They were out. And then Tommy Rees got involved, and you step it up. With Xavion Bradshaw, I think that's a Dell thing and not building the relationship the way it needs to be built, and doing the work he needs to do to evaluate this kid and get it to the point where this kid can get on campus. So it's just the way that it is. I think it's just about putting in the work. It's about, with Jeff Quinn, it's different. I don't think Jeff Quinn doesn't work. I just don't think Jeff Quinn's a closer. I don't think he has that personality. He's going to go close on top players. Don't think he is. Eugene McGovern, Notre Dame didn't lose Aller QB to Penn State. Yes, they did. As Notre Dame's first 2 offers were Angeli and Wimsatt, top 2 on their board. That's not how it works, Gene. Gene, you've been doing this a long time, man. We may disagree with their board, but they didn't lose him to Penn State. Yes, they did. Look, and you spin it any way you want, Gene, but here's the reality. You know this as well as anybody. The order in which you get an offer is not the order in which you are their preference, number one. Number two, even if that were true, sometimes you learn about a player later or you get interest in a player later and he skyrockets past the people that were first on the board. That's an absolute fact. And you want an example? Defensive end. Darren Agu was what? The 15th offered defensive end, and he surpassed a bunch of dudes, including DJ Wesolak, who was a top 100 player that people are thinking, for a while there's going to go to Clemson. The DJ Wesolak was going to come to Notre Dame, but then they found Darren Agu and they wanted him instead. Simple. It's as simple as that. When Notre Dame was recruiting Steve Angeli and Gavin Wimsatt, number one, they stopped recruiting Gavin Wimsatt, okay, for a number of reasons. But when they got on Drew Aller, they pushed for him. They wanted him. There's a reason that Steve Angeli did not commit to Notre Dame until after it became obvious that Drew Aller was going to Penn State. Now, you can believe that's just a coincidence, Gene, but you're a sharp guy. You've been following Notre Dame recruiting for a very long time. Use some sense here. There's a reason why they got Angeli to pop when it right after all the crystal balls started happening for Penn State, because Aller had basically told people behind the scenes he was going to Penn State. That's when Angeli popped. Now, if you just think that's a coincidence, then I'm sorry, you're being deceived. That's not the case. They did want Drew Aller. If Drew Aller would have wanted to commit to Notre Dame, they absolutely would have taken him instead of Steve Angeli. And you can see he's a little bit of a late bloomer. Some teams got on him late, but he's dominating at these camps. And you see the talent on his high school film is enormous. And now a lot of people are coming around to what I was telling everybody months ago, which is this dude has a ton of talent. His upside is as high as anybody in the class. If you think Notre Dame thought Steve Angeli is better than him, to your point, it could just be a disagreement with the board. That could be the case. But what I'm telling you is that wasn't the case. I'm telling you is I talked to plenty of sources that made it very clear that at the time when that was going on, that Drew Aller was the quarterback they were making a push for. When they saw that they were going to miss on him, that's when they turned to Steve Angeli and said, hey, we want you. That's just how it went down. I mean, I'm not going to spin it for you. Gene, you've known me a long time. We've talked before. You know I'm not going to BS you. That's how it went down. And that's just there's nothing to it. That's exactly how it went down. Okay, I'm going to try to find some more questions here. Jermaine Berkeley, I love this question. Any rock star recruiting offensive line coaches out there asking for a friend? Not that I want Quinn fired. There's plenty of guys out there. I don't know if, for example, the guy that the previous offensive coordinator wanted to hire instead of Coach Quinn is the offensive line coach for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He now has a Super Bowl ring. So, I think he was pretty good hire. There were some guys out there, and there's some guys out there now that if for some reason Notre Dame made a move, there would be good coaches out there. But at the end of the day, Brian Kelly's not moving on from Jeff Quinn. It's not going to happen. That would be the most shocking thing that Brian Kelly could ever do, in my opinion. I just don't see it happening. The only other time he ever hired offensive line coaches not named Jeff Quinn was the 2 times he had to make hires when Jeff Quinn was still the head coach of Buffalo. That's it. And yeah. Sid Irish says this went from possibly having a top 5 class to maybe a top 10 class in the end. No difference. Sid, you're being way too negative on this one. Number one, with what's in the class now, they'd have to lose players to not have a top 10 class, a locked-in top 10 class. Even with some of the losses on offense, this absolutely still has a chance to be a top 5 class. You're about to likely get a top 50 linebacker, top 50 player at linebacker, who some people are pushing to say should be a 5-star. You've got a really good chance with a top 100 safety coming up. Notre Dame is right now the leader for a pair of top 100 receivers. It's not like they're just adding a bunch of stiffs. Yes, they're not going to – this is what frustrates me sometimes. It's like we get on these two opposite ends it's either, everything is wonderful and rosy and it's all phenomenal, or it's this exaggeration of, it all sucks. That's not the case. Are things going as well as they should right now in recruiting, especially on offense? No, they're not. They're flat out not. Is Notre Dame recruiting bad players? No, they're not. If they get, let's just say they get one of Williams and Merriweather and Nicholas Anderson, they don't get another running back, and the only other offensive lineman they land is Emil Wagner. Okay, let's just say hypothetically that is it. Is that a class that's going to close the gap on Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson? No. Is that still a class that probably 125 to 123 other teams in college football would die for? Absolutely, on offense. You're still going to have a 4-star top 200 running back. You're going to have a quarterback that, although I don't view him this high, recruiting services view as a 4-star. ESPN has him as a top 150 player. You're going to have two top 100. Well, let me rephrase that. You're going to have one top 100 receiver. That's a surefire top 100 guy. That'd be C.J. Williams or Tobias. You're going to have another receiver that ESPN ranks as a top 70 player nationally. You're going to have 2 very talented tight ends. You're going to have a top 200 player, Joey Tenona, a top 200 player in Ty Chan, a top 200 player in Emil Wagner on the offense. That's a good offensive class. Very good offensive class. Here's where I criticize it. It's not an offensive class that's going to close the gap on Bama, Clemson, Ohio State. That's the standard. But what you're doing is you're making it seem like it's not even an offensive class that's going to be, Indiana, right? Because they're definitely going to have a top 5 defensive class. So I think we have to be willing to look at this more objectively. And it's not like this, oh, now it's not even going to be a top 10. Yes, it is. Unless they lose guys that are already in the class, this is going to be a top 10 class. It is. It's about whether or not they're going to be able to maintain that top 5 status. That's a legitimate question. But this is still, barring a flat-out disaster, still going to be one of the 3 or 4 best classes of Brian Kelly's tenure. We have to be able to look at this more objectively and say, is it good enough? No. Is it still good? Absolutely. And that's where we're at. Jason Rose says, I think Maris Luafau could develop into an integral player for this defense, plays fast and physical. Hopefully Freeman has gotten it out of him. We'll see. Ryan Roberts talked about this yesterday. He really likes Maris Luafau off film. Wade Garrett says, can having the NIL be a huge advantage to leveling the playing field for Notre Dame? Yes, I think it can be. Notre Dame is still in the spotlight. I mean, Book was a Heisman contender with 15 touchdowns. I think we have a lot of things to offer kids. Absolutely agree. I mean, and I said this in a TV spot this morning. Ian Book, like you said, was a Heisman contender despite having very mediocre stats, like relative to other Heisman contenders, right? That's what I'm saying. And why? Because he's the quarterback at Notre Dame. I mean, that's the only reason that I'm trying to look up the Heisman Trophy voting for 2020 just to kind of see, but Ian Book finished 9th. He threw for 2,800 yards and 15 touchdowns. The guy that finished 8th had 33 touchdowns. I mean, you look at some of these guys ahead of him. Justin Fields was ahead of him. Najee Harris and Breece Hall, who had great years. Kyle Trask threw 43 touchdowns. He finished 4th. I mean, you look at it, Kyle Trask. I mean, Ian Book shouldn't be in this conversation with these guys statistically. Right? It's not a knock on Ian Book. It's just statistically he didn't have the numbers that you expect the Heisman candidate to have. But he's the quarterback at Notre Dame. They were winning. He's in the game. Imagine what you could do with a Trevor Lawrence, a Justin Fields, a Phil Dracovic, a guy that has that high level talent. Yeah, you're going to be able to you're going to absolutely be able to sell that. No question about it. Drives me crazy. And this is what I'm talking about. Defensive recruiting, A+. Offensive recruiting, boo. Again, that's an extreme over-exaggeration, and I already ran it down. And look, we have to be able to kind of have a more rational conversation about this. Is it good enough? No. Are there things to criticize? Yes. Is it that? No, it's not that at all. D-Rock says, I don't think this has been mentioned, so hit the like button, share, notifications bell, and make sure you subscribe as well. D-Rock, I appreciate you always reminding us of that. I do appreciate that. Tyler says, do you see Riley Mills having the same ceiling as Jason Adamiola? In 2021, no. I think he's going to be a year away from that, but ultimately, could he have as high of a ceiling as Jason Adamiola? Absolutely. I love Riley Mills. I think Riley Mills could be a really, really good player. Chief Brody, anyone else nervous about the future of college football with the NIL? I am. And again, if they don't do this right, it's going to be the death of college football as we know it. If they do it right, this could be the best thing that ever happened to the game. And I think especially for basketball too, it could definitely help even the playing field of basketball. But they got to do it right and not turn this into the Wild West. And that's what the NCAA is doing by, completely being derelict in their duties of leadership. It's just disgusting. Chris Ayers, for anyone who hasn't put Drew Aller in the YouTube search option, do it, and you will be so impressed by his tape. Yes, absolutely. Technical technician. Come on, coach. No one believes all the top recruits are not academically viable. That's what he said. I'm not supposed to read your minds. However, certainly is a sizable portion that are not. Simple semantics. No, it's not simple semantics because that is not accurate. Again, do you truly believe that the minute Marcus Freeman is hired, that all of a sudden, all these top players, just miraculously one or two classes, became academically qualified to get to Notre Dame? Do you really think that's true? Come on. It's not accurate. There's a reason why every time Notre Dame wins, they recruit better. Are there kids that can't get into Notre Dame? Yes. Are there kids that can get into Notre Dame but don't want to come to Notre Dame? Yes. Can Notre Dame get, for whatever reason, 90% of the kids in the top 100, legitimate top 100, not rankings, but like legitimate? No, they're not. Can they get a lot? Yes. Can Notre Dame, if they find a kid that maybe doesn't have the academics, but they think can succeed there for whatever reason, can they get those kids into school? They can, and they have. So, no, I don't buy that. I don't buy that a sizable portion has. No, I don't. I think that Notre Dame can absolutely get a top 5 to 7 recruiting class every single season if you're putting in a good product in the field and you've got the right coaching staff. No question about it. And that's exactly what Clemson's done. Go look at Clemson's recruiting rankings the last 10 years, and you tell me how those compare to Alabama's. Yet they've got 2 titles. Tell me how they compare to Ohio State and Georgia, who've combined for 1 title compared to Clemson's 2. Let's see here. Searcher Green says, I still am more concerned with the Rock's XFL plan. No college needed. Play in XFL right out of high school. Get paid for 3 years. Enter draft. Mostly because the Rock is pushing it. I don't think that hurts college football at all. I don't. And I think if anything, that exposes that the game is still more about the brands than it is about the players. And that's just a fact. Because if the NBA, for example, all of a sudden said, you know what, you can go directly to the NBA, it's not going to hurt college basketball. It's going to mean that maybe there are some players that aren't, the freshman phenoms, but it wasn't that long ago that college basketball was driven by veteran players. The game is going to still be good. The Duke fans are going to still be Duke fans. Kentucky fans are going to still be Kentucky fans. And if there are kids who have no interest in going to class and they just want to make money off football, then good for them. Go to the XFL and make money. Notre Dame is still going to have a football team. And it's not like those aren't the kind – and if anything, it helps Notre Dame because those aren't really the kind of kids that Notre Dame is going to be going after anyway. It's going to hurt Alabama. It's going to hurt Clemson. It's going to hurt Ohio State. And so, for people that want to have more parity, I think that's where it's going to be. I think it's going to help. Okay, here we go. Jesse Ferguson. Out of the top teams in the country – Bama, Ohio State, Clemson, Oklahoma, Georgia, etc. Who do you think Notre Dame would have the best chance of beating in a playoff meeting? Who would give Notre Dame the most trouble? So let's just assume, Jesse, that Notre Dame is doing the things on offense that we think they're going to do and that the offensive line is as good as Notre Dame's coaching staff seems to think it's going to be with Kane Madden and those kind of things. I think Notre Dame matches up well with Ohio State. I think Notre Dame would match up well with Georgia for sure. Oklahoma. I think Bama and Clemson would be – it's going to sound funny because of what I said about Clemson, but again, football is a lot about matchups. I would be a little concerned about Notre Dame's offense against Clemson's defense just because I don't have a lot of faith in the offensive line at this point in time, but if the offensive line is as good, then I think that they can certainly beat Clemson because I think Notre Dame's defensive line would give, in that situation where the offensive line is as good as Notre Dame thinks it's going to be and some other people that are higher on Kane Madden think it's going to be, if they're right, I think Notre Dame will beat Clemson because I think Notre Dame's defensive line would give Clemson's offensive line more problems than Clemson's defensive line, although elite and better than Notre Dame's. Comparing them, it's not about who has the better D-line, Notre Dame or Clemson. It's about who has the bigger advantage against the offensive line they're going to go against. Does that make sense? And so I would say the toughest matchups for me would be Bama, just because we've never seen Notre Dame compete with them. And honestly, I think Oklahoma, because I think Oklahoma's defense is going to be good enough that they can make enough stops where their offense can get. I'm telling you, I could be completely wrong on this, but I think Oklahoma is going to be a dangerous team this year. I really do. The voice of college football, Mark Rogers, always great analysis, my man. Thank you for joining the show, Mark. I appreciate that. If you are not familiar with Mark's channel, make sure that you subscribe to that. He talks about all things college football, not just Notre Dame. And he's had me on his channel a couple of times, which I appreciate. Thomas Walsh says, do you know if Merriweather's wanting to run track at the next level as well? I have not heard that. It will not surprise me if some teams are going to try to use that against Notre Dame. That is something that has worked against Notre Dame in the past. If Oregon wants to get in with him, they could use that to their advantage. That's what they did with Braden Lindsey. So that's certainly a concerning aspect of it as well. Anthony L. Is Quinn Ewers as good as advertised? Does Notre Dame have a legitimate chance to get Arch? Is he as good as advertised? I think Quinn Ewers is a very, very good quarterback, very talented quarterback at least. I think there's parts of his game in actual games that need to improve, but in drills and 7-on-7s, he looks phenomenal. He's got really great skills. He just, as a junior, he's got parts of his game he's got to develop. So yes, he's a top 25 player in my opinion. Do I think he's as good as advertised from the standpoint of people hyping him up to be like better than Trevor Lawrence and coming out of high school? No, not at all. I think that's just selling. That's just click stuff. He's very, very good, but like generational player, not yet. Now maybe he will be as a senior, but I haven't seen that yet. Does Notre Dame have a legitimate chance to get Arch? I don't think so. I don't think so. And I'm going to address this here real quick. Chief Brody said this. Did I miss something? Where's all the doom and gloom coming from? And then Paul responds with, Chief Brody, I've been wondering the same thing. I thought I stepped into the twilight zone with today's comment. So number one, I want to address this a couple things because this kind of frustrates me a little bit. When I think the frustration comes from because a lot of Notre Dame fans realize how close Notre Dame is right now. They realize, much like I think Brian Kelly realized after this season, that Notre Dame is not as far away as people think they are, or at least not as far away as they were several years ago. And you see a guy like Marcus Freeman come in, and you see the job he's doing from a coaching staff or recruiting standpoint. You see the guys they're getting on defense, and you look and you say, boy, this is just the thing that you've been wanting. And then you look at the offense and you see that, yeah, they're recruiting good players, but they're not recruiting that same level. And that side of the ball has not been good. I mean, it's not been championship caliber in recent years. You're coming off a year in which you scored 33 points a game, and your offensive staff's not working their butts off. I mean, just everybody just grinding as hard as possible to get the best possible class you can have. It's just simply not happening. And I think the frustration is it's kind of like, is this going to be what we've seen in the past, where one side of the ball is good enough to compete for a championship, but the other one holds you back? And it's been different sides of the ball. In 2015, you were good enough offensively, but not good enough defensively because of Brian Van Gorder. You look at 2018, you were good enough defensively, but you weren't good enough offensively. This past season, similar situation. And so it's one of those frustrations that some Notre Dame fans legitimately have. I have, where it's like, why can't you get it all together? Why can't you to make the moves? It's one thing to hire a coach to replace somebody, but look, Dabo's had to fire people. Nick Saban's had to fire people. Urban Meyer's had to fire people. Brian Kelly needs to be more willing to make some of the tough decisions sometimes and say, hey, look, yeah, you're doing a good job. Offensive, and this is what I said earlier. I don't agree with the offensive recruiting sucks. It doesn't suck. It's good recruiting. But good recruiting isn't going to win you a championship. That's the frustration. You've got one side of the ball carrying weight, and people are asking, why isn't this other side of the ball? And then the counter is, well, look at the last two recruiting classes. The guys on the staff now were not the primary drivers of the last two recruiting classes. I mean, can we all just finally accept that? They're just not. Okay? And it's not a coincidence that you're struggling to close on some of these guys when you don't have an offensive coordinator who was the way that Chip Long was. And he was able to kind of overcome that. And he kind of still had that Harry Heastan connection a little bit. So that helped. They're not doing the job they need to do. That's frustrating. When it looked like you're going to get Tobias Merriweather, you're going to get C.J. Williams, you're going to get Nicholas Singleton, and now it's looking like, well, okay, you could have had Xavion Bradshaw. Well, they don't want him. Tobias is likes Notre Dame, but he's maybe thinking about carrying this thing into the fall. You're not going to get Billy Schrouth now when it looked like you're going to get him. You're not going to get Carson Hinsman when it looked like you could get him. They're missing opportunities to really put a great product on the field offensively, and that's the frustration. And so, yeah, is Notre Dame doing better than they did before? Is this way better than what it was under Ty and Charlie and Davey and all those guys? Yeah, but that shouldn't be the standard at Notre Dame. The standard should be, are you doing what you need to do to compete for a championship? And the fact of the matter is, when Notre Dame has played the elite teams of college football, right? They scored 14 points against Bama in 2012. They scored 19 and 17 points against Georgia. They've scored 3 points in the postseason against Clemson the first time, 10 points against Clemson in postseason the second time, and they're coming off another 14-point performance against Alabama. Scored 8 points offensively in the big game against Miami. The only game you even scored points was 2015, a year where you actually had an offense that could score points. But then that year, your defense was like epically bad, despite having a ton of NFL players on it. I think that's the frustration people have is at some point in time during his entire tenure, Brian Kelly has had a championship caliber player or depth chart at every position, but he's never had the combination at the right time to play for that. You've got an opportunity now to do that, and certain coaches aren't carrying their weight. And the fact that at least one of those coaches is was always part of a questionable hire to begin with, that's going to ramp up that negativity again. Now, Coach Quinn has an opportunity to silence a lot of that this year. He does, and hopefully he does. But right now, if we're being honest and objective, you can say that is where that frustration is coming from, and that's where my frustration is coming from in that regards. Let's see who get in here. Oh, this is a good question. Jason Rose, from 2017 to 2020, which Notre Dame team has been the best all around? I would probably go with, man, it's a tough one. I'd probably go with the 2018 team. It's probably the best all around so far. I thought that was a very good defense. I thought that offense, once Ian Book took over and they had an offense that fit the quarterback, instead of trying to have Brandon Wimbush run Ian's type of offense, they finally let Ian run the offense, and they were RPOs and quick game and all that. I thought that team was the most balanced that we've seen. And look, and I actually thought for the most part Notre Dame battled with Clemson. I just thought the offense missed some opportunities. And they had a bad break when Julian Love went down. But that was not a 30-3 game, in my opinion. I mean, that was a much more competitive game. I thought they caught some bad breaks from an officiating standpoint. I still felt like Chase Claypool recovered that fumble. But that would have made it more competitive. You still would have lost, but because the offense couldn't score on Clemson. But that would have made it a little bit more competitive. But you had some chances in that game. Ian Book makes a couple throws that he should have made. That's a different ball game. Whereas Alabama game this year, they weren't going to be competitive. I mean, they didn't have the players, at some spots. They didn't have the scheme in place, and the quarterback wasn't going to make those throws. I mean, he just wasn't going to do it. And the defense, Alabama could have scored more on this defense if they wanted to. I mean, I'm not saying they scored 50, but they had to scored at least another touchdown, maybe 10 points on this defense if they wanted to. They went into coast mode. They knew they had the game. They knew Notre Dame couldn't score on them, and they were going to make sure that they were healthy going into play Ohio State, in my opinion. All right, so Sid Irish and I are about to have our biggest disagreement yet. Says Ewers has great hair, though. I'm going to have to disagree with you on that one. Another mailbag tomorrow. Yes, we will have another mailbag tomorrow, and hopefully Vince is going to be part of it. The plan is for right now, but he's going to try to hustle back, and yeah. Let's see here. Sean McArdle, while I'm watching Barca on my Twitter, first of all, just do what I did. Just take a day off from Twitter. That's what I'm doing because it's going to drive you nuts. It really is. I'm going to try to get these last couple questions because we gotta wind this thing down now. Mike Huff, it's a good question. Do you think it's time for a more major dynamic name to come in on offense to recruit? It definitely helped the defense. Honestly, Mike, I don't think it's about a name. I don't think Marcus Freeman is successful right now because of his name. I think his name is what it is because of the work he does. And I mean, I'm kind of nitpicking a little bit, but I don't think it's so much about it. If you bring a guy with a name in, but he's not putting in the work, then it's not going to have much of a difference. Do I think there are changes they could and should make on offense to get this thing going? Yeah, I think so, but not all of them involve getting rid of people. Sometimes it's just about creating a sense of accountability, having a better plan, and making sure that you're being more involved to make sure that plan is being carried out. I think that's really the first thing I would change about offense. And then are there some other changes maybe I'd make personnel-wise? Yeah, but they're just not going to happen. Okay, I think that is it. All right, so that's going to do. Let me see here. Any more here? Carmine, this is a good one. I read a few years ago that Harry Hiestand was a reluctant recruiter, but he got players because of his reputation. Why is Coach Kelly so loyal to Coach Quinn? I don't know. I want to push back on that a little bit about a reluctant recruiter. It's not that he was a reluctant recruiter. He didn't like to recruit. That was never a question. But not liking to recruit and not being good at it are two completely different things. Harry Hiestand was a great recruiter because he identified the kids that he wanted and he went and got them. It's simple as that. And his reputation helped, but I did a lot more covering of recruiting then than I do now, like me personally talking to kids and things like that. And his pitches worked. I mean, I remember talking to a recruit that signed with Notre Dame and there was another big time program that's offering him. And the kid was like, this coach told me I was going to start as a freshman and I was going to do this, I was going to do that. And he was like, man, Coach Hiestand told me this, and this. And it was just more genuine. And he was honest. And he told me where my game needed to work. They're just telling me I'm the greatest thing ever. They're not really telling me how they're going to develop me. Coach Hiestand gave me a full plan on how he's going to develop me. And then, then also he had the reputation behind him to do that. I think Coach Quinn is trying to repeat that, but he doesn't have the reputation behind him to do it. And I think that is the issue. And so I think that the reputation part helps. It's big time. But I don't think you're only recruiting because of reputation. You still got to put the work in. And trust me, Harry Hiestand put the work in. I've interviewed or known relatives of or known the players of all the big recruits that Harry Hiestand got. And I can assure you that he worked to get them into the class. He didn't just walk up, hi, I'm Harry Hiestand. I'm the greatest O-line coach in the history of the world. I'm just going to play for me. Oh, okay. He had to put in work. So this notion that he didn't like to recruit, that was something that was, it was kind of to me a BS charge because it was spun in a way that Coach Quinn's going to be a great recruiter. Okay, well, Jeff Quinn may like to recruit, but he's not as good of a recruiter as Harry Hiestand. So I don't care if you like it or not. Are you getting the job done? That's all I care about. And was Harry Hiestand perfect? No, there were years they came up short on numbers, but they were consistently got top talent and depth of talent. And to me, that's kind of where I'm at from. Chief Brody said, I had to delete my Twitter, man. It was fun during football season, but in general, it's a relatively toxic platform for me. I agree. I would not be on Twitter if it wasn't for my job. All righty. Cupcake Banana is back in the podcast. I ran into some commits at a party on Saturday. They seemed like they were having a lot of fun. She said targets, a lot of targets on Saturday. They seem like they're having a lot of fun. That's good because, we keep being told that, Notre Dame's not a fun place to be, but that's good. I'm glad that you said that. And I say that sarcastically because I think you can have fun at any college you go to. If you aren't, if you know how to have fun, you're going to have fun anywhere you go. Okay. And that's going to be it. So I'm going to wrap up today's show. I appreciate everybody being with me for this. It went a lot longer than I thought it was going to be, but I appreciate everybody being part of the show today. Appreciate all the questions. Hopefully Vince is back tomorrow. It's going to be a lot smoother when we get him back. And, we're going to have a great week next week. I'm going to try to get this information to you as soon as possible in regards to what our message board situation is going to be. I'm very excited to kind of get that all figured out this weekend and get that rocking and rolling. So please stay locked in. If you are on Twitter, follow me at Coach D178. You can also email me anytime if you have questions or concerns or comments at Brian my email is brian@irishbreakdown.com. And of course, stay locked into the channel. We'll be back for another mailbag tomorrow. That's going to be another mailbag type. So we'll have a lot of questions, I'm sure. And hopefully we'll have Vince back tomorrow. So if there are any trolls that jump into our show during the deal, we'll be able to deal with it a little bit quicker. So I appreciate your patience today. Appreciate everybody being with me this week. There's been a really long week, a lot of news going on. Hopefully we're going to get some good news tomorrow. We expect Jaden Bellamy to make his decision at some time tomorrow. Depending on when he does that, we may just talk about it during the podcast or during the mailbag. If he does it after the mailbag, then we may come back and have another Jaden Bellamy commitment one if he picks Notre Dame, right? So that's what we do tomorrow. So I hope everybody has a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you all again very, very soon.